Welcome to this regular meeting of the Fargo School Board. Before I ask for an agenda approval, Jennifer, are you connected?
I am, yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
Okay, sorry for the late start. Just a couple of minutes ago, Anne Marie was notified that she needed to set up a call-in, so I think we've got that all taken care of. We do have an agenda in front of us, and Christy? Oh, Jim, go ahead.
I'd like to move approval of the agenda as provided with the addition of an HR addendum under 4B, but I'd also like to pull item 4E and place it under the business section.
Okay, so we will make that consent agenda EL9 monitoring report will now be item 5G of the business section. Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor with proceeding in that manner, please vote by saying yes.
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 Any opposed? No. Okay, we have a modified agenda. Staff, before we get started, guys, almost 9 years ago to today, somebody started in this position in this boardroom, and her name is Anne Marie. The first set of minutes that she took or partook in with, you know what I mean, was exactly 9 years ago. So we think that's pretty cool. So congratulations, Anne Marie. It's been a ride, huh?
Thank you. Yes.
Uh-huh. I would also say we have a very, very lengthy agenda and very important items, and we need to get through the entire thing to culminate into recognizing our exiting board members. So,
Madam President,
Yes.
just a point of order. Anne Marie started only 9 years ago, so we want to make it sound like the beginning and not the end. Just
true. So, very good. So we will run this, I will try to move this meeting along as expeditiously and thoroughly as possible. So, staff reports, Marzano evaluation report. Dr. Gandhi, would you like to make introductions, please?
sure. I'm going to ask Doug Andring, our HR director, to come up and present to you our annual report that our Human Resources Department do on our Marzano evaluation systems. As Doug will talk to throughout the report, as you know, this year Century Code requirements changed because our learning modality changed when we switched to distance learning, so that did impact our numbers and this report a little bit, but I will let Doug talk to that, so I'll hand it over.
Thank you. Would probably be necessary for me to say we will have a more shortened and abbreviated version of this report. Definitely not a half hour. So the Fargo Public Schools Teacher Evaluation Report, as we'll see in the information and hear a little bit, was a little bit different this year, but much the same due to an executive order by Governor Burgum to suspend teacher evaluations for those teachers that had more than 3 years. So if we dive in here, much of this is the same as last year. Our purpose, improve teaching and learning. This is why we do teacher evaluations. This falls under our strategic initiative 6, equitable resources and planning, where we implement a framework for teacher and principal performance appraisals that are based on research-supported instructional strategies. Some of our indicators of success would be the report to this board, a percentage of completed teacher and administrator growth plans, and then we look at the level 3 applying and level 4 innovating rating scores within our Marzano model. We take a look at our administrative policy 5130, that's evaluating teacher performance. It is our goal that our evaluation system would do all of those following things. Specific to number 1, be based on multiple approved contacts, including classroom observations. Specifically for our teachers in their first 3 years, we do require 2 formal observations, 2 informal observations, and then 4 walkthroughs. Now, only formal observations are included in the summative score, which we'll be seeing at the end of this presentation. Those teachers also receive 2 formal evaluations per year, one on December 15th and then one due by April 15th per Century Code. And then teachers 3 years or more, they receive one formal observation, one informal observation, and then 2 walkthroughs. And they'd receive either one informal or one formal evaluation, depending upon what year in the rotation they're in, every 4 years. And then specific to number 4, we designate the supervisor responsible for carrying out the evaluation process. With our structure, that can be a principal, assistant principal, or a dean. And then our Every Student Succeeds Act. So determination of educator effectiveness. So that is determined by number of students, teachers evaluated on the model, number of elements and components rated during the year. As you'll see, all 4 of our domains were open again this year, and we have 60 elements that can be rated within the Marzano model. And then that calculation is used to determine ineffective teaching practices, ultimately what we report into the state. And that is not ineffective teachers, but rather the aggregate results that we get from those reports. And then, as I said before, Governor Burgum had issued a suspension of certified staff evaluation requirements. So as outlined here on April 7th, that order came down, and that applied to any teachers, principals, or assistant or associate superintendents that had more than 3 years of experience. On April 9th, the district sent out communication to all principals that the requirement of summative evaluations, which were typically due April 15th, would be suspended for teachers that had more than 3 years of service. And then due to the governor's suspension of those evaluation requirements, there will be no requirement that any school district within North Dakota report in for teacher effectiveness reporting this year. And then that last bullet point, the number of teachers with less than 3 years experience in this district is 133. And then we can see 3 or more years, 856, so that's the bulk of our teaching staff. Total number of teachers evaluated with an eye observation, 989. So the number of summative evaluations completed this year was 896, which I really think is a tip of the hat to the principals and the teachers, given everything that was going on. We almost completed all summative evaluations, regardless of the suspension of the requirement to do so. So I do want to tip my hat to all of them. And then on the next slide, this is going to be, or start looking at the domains. This is domain 1, what we're looking at. This focuses on classroom strategies and behaviors. And if we look at that green box, up in the left-hand corner, DQ1, communicating learning goals and feedback. This was part of the district's operational plan that we would monitor performance, and every teacher would be evaluated on what's called Design Question 1.1, providing clear learning goals and scales. So in December, and then at the end of the year, I provided reports to principals. Here are our aggregate results per building on how we did with that. Boxes, whoop. And then if we look at domain 2, planning and prepping, that focuses on planning of preparation for units of instruction and lesson. Domain 3, that'll address deliberate practice and encourages teacher self-reflection. And then domain 4 finally addresses collegiality and professionalism. And then again, as previously stated, all domains and all 60 elements were open this year for rating. But that doesn't necessarily mean a teacher or a principal will rate or be rated on all 60. And in fact, that wouldn't necessarily be a practice. A principal will have some latitude within their buildings and their goals to pick the elements that they'll want to rate on. And then finally, the last slide would be our aggregate results this year. You'll see over to the left last year's results. There were total ratings of 7,031. So all the ratings that happened with all the teachers. And then you can see total level 4, total level 3. And then on the right-hand side, you can see what our results were for this year. And those numbers are a little bit less, and that'll make sense when we had about 140 teachers that did not receive that summative evaluation that had more than 3 years. So the results or the actual rating numbers are a little bit less, yet our percentages in the levels are about the same, a little bit of movement there. So that is a very high-level overview of the Marzano evaluation. Like I said, it was a little bit different this year, but all in all, by the time we did get to the end, most of the principals and the teachers were at a place where observations already had happened. The performance really was at a place where it could be rated, and we were able to get most of the evaluations done considering everything, so. That I'd take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. You know, I was DQ, I got stuck on DQ for a while, so I Googled Marzano DQ, which was explained later in there.
Design
But there are some
question.
live YouTube videos that you can watch. They're very informative because it's kind of like you're peeking in on an evaluation process. So I encourage board members to check it out. I learned a lot just by watching that. So any questions for Mr. Andring? Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Doug. Could you go back one slide? The 4321 on the bottom, is that a rating that's assigned to each of the teachers after the evaluation is completed?
Yep, that would be a summative rating for all of the observations that were done for that teaching year. So they'll fall into either innovating, applying, developing, so on and so forth. And that's what we would see for the aggregate summative results after
And
April.
Is that information shared with anybody?
The aggregate results, I get those. The principals have their aggregate building results, but that is, the teacher does see that. And actually, when that summative evaluation is submitted, the teacher has to sign off on it, can make comments in there, and then submit it back to the principal.
We use the Marzano tool for teachers. What's used for administrators?
The administrators, you know, I'd have to really work with Missy on that. We don't do our certified administrators through the Marzano method. And in fact, there is a support staff Marzano type of tool that can be used. We don't typically utilize that yet, but I know Dr. Gross and Missy, as far as rating principals, I'd really have to rely on Missy on kind of more of the specifics on it, but we don't use the Marzano teaching evaluation. I don't know if.
So each year we have the operational plan for each principal that we make sure aligns to our goals for the district. And so each of those, we have them self-rate in the fall, and then we rate on there. And I was gonna say, I don't think we have 5 levels like this, but it is a rubric that they rate on, so I think it's 4 levels. And then we also have a narrative piece that goes where we'll write strengths, refinements to each principal that we're evaluating. So we agree upon that K-12, what that plan looks like for those goals that we have and the rubric for them to evaluate on. Is that helpful?
Jim, go ahead.
Doug, this last slide that you have up here kind of confused me at first, because I thought, are these results for the entire state? Because we don't have 6,066 teachers that we evaluated, I'm sure of that. So obviously that's multiple evaluations that get counted, right?
Right, and, go ahead.
Can you tell me on the level 2 and level 1, the 895 and the 158, can you actually give me the number of actual teachers that are in those categories?
I could, I don't have it here though, but yep, I could get that. And when looking at the total ratings, if every principal was to rate every teacher, 60 total elements, and then 900 and some teachers, there would be a total of about, I think it was last year about 54, 55,000 ratings. So obviously they pick and select the elements that they do rate on based on the goals in their building, and that's where you get the 60-66 for our district. So, yep.
Very good. Being an employer myself, I don't like the word evaluation because these are really development tools. And talk about where you can grow and identify that together. So that's how I view these. Hopefully that's how the district does as well. Okay. You must have done a good job, Doug. You don't have a lot of questions. Mobility report. Dr. Gross was going to present that, but are you?
Yeah, Dr. Gross is unable to join us today, attending to a family issue, so Missy is going to provide the mobility report. As board members know, we traditionally provide the mobility report twice a year, so this would be our end-of-year mobility report. We did, mobility data did take a freeze a little bit during our distance learning the last 9 weeks of school, just because at that time we did not have students coming in or out of our district at the same rate that we normally do during that period as well. So with that being said, I'll hand it over to Missy.
So you have the report in front of you, and just a clarification, this does not include mobility within the district. So it is only new students in and students leaving the district as it's broken down. So if we look at the overall, we have a graphic and a chart which represents the same thing on page 2. And so we can see 2 years of data for each level, elementary, middle school, high school. And you can also look at that graphically. And so transfers in versus transfers out as we go forward. And we, we are basically the same amount in as out over the course of the year. One of the pieces that I think is nice to differentiate is the question about our neighboring districts. So it is pulled out in the graphs on page 3 and 4, where it's going to show you if they're coming in from Moorhead or West Fargo or Minnesota in general or North Dakota and private. And then we break down each level by that. So you can look at middle school, high school. And then what is new this year in the report is the last page. And I think it was a question that we had either a year ago or in the fall when we went through the report about ethnicity or special groups. And so Bob was able to, or Dr. Gross was able to go back in and just refine that data for us to take a look at. And I would be glad to answer any questions that I can, if you have.
Becca?
Thank you, Missy. We've been receiving these reports for a few years now. I'm wondering, how do we really use this information in the district? Are there a couple of examples? It's interesting information to have, and I appreciate it, but I'm wondering what tool it serves.
I
Thank you.
remember when they started, and that was really a conversation around our public schools really losing a lot of students to private schools, and also what is happening to our Woodrow Wilson students. At one point, it became a board report that they analyzed every year. I would say also, what do we use this for? I'm sure there's some enrollment projections, but it's pretty obvious that at the elementary level, there's a lot more movement. For example, my son was in 4 elementary schools across the country by the time he was in the 3rd grade, but things start to settle down at the middle and the high school level. But really, a lot of this movement has to do with the parents' work, where they work. And I think that's probably the biggest factor in determining where students go to school. Correct me if I'm wrong?
No, I think those are fantastic reasons for the board report. Administratively, there's a wide variety of areas in which we look at student mobility, whether it's by building, not only for scheduling purposes and then just for our own awareness, but also we do look at data for student performance and how students do when they're continuously in our district for a period of time, or looking at the needs of new students coming in as well. It allows us with planning, if we know that we, as a district, for example, serve at about 34% mobility rate, then we know the influx of students coming in and out. As it relates specifically to teaching and learning, it kind of really helps us provide direction, because we have to know that with that coming in and out, there's some things that we have to do that we do unique programming in Fargo Public Schools, but we also have to be able to make sure that our programming is not limiting with that high of a mobility rate, that we can catch up any students where they are as well. And then, most importantly, I think when you break it down by building or by subpopulation, it's an indicator for us on student achievement. And if we need to do something differently, we've had a conversation at this board table around the services that we provided for our Native American students. And one of the struggles that we've seen is that some of our Native American students don't stay with us for their 4 years of the high school period because they have opportunities. And so being able to take a look at that data and say, okay, what is that something differently that we can take a look at? So administratively, there's a lot of different ways that we look at that data, but mainly for planning, scheduling, and then looking at the programming and the services that we offer.
Go ahead, David.
Missy, if you just look at the transfers in versus the transfers out, we had almost 200 more kids transfer out than in. What effect does that have on our year-end enrollment, our 2019 enrollment versus our 2020?
So I did take a look at that because I was curious myself, and what RSP thought we'd be at 11,248 at the start of the fall. And then when I pulled the enrollment for the district on June 8th, 2020, and we were at 11,295. And so I guess I'm very used to, I think the districts in our region, us dipping at the end of the year, even below where we started. And so that's not our starting, but I was looking at what RSP had predicted for this school year. And so that showed a little bit of growth there, but usually we are lower in the fall. So one aspect that we look at is there a pattern with any elementaries losing more kids, for example, over the course of a year? And I will say that we are seeing a pattern with some of our higher free and reduced lunch, more mobility of in and out. And that can go both ways, but just something for us to look at. So in those classrooms, I am curious to do a little more digging to see what does the mobility look like monthly. And that is something that we track, because that is, it's a lot of planning for a teacher when those groups keep changing. And probably 20 years ago, I would love to know what the data was. I think that's something that has changed, or increased is what I should say, the mobility.
Great. I don't see any other questions.
Robin, I have a question, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
Jen, can you hear me? Okay. So my question was actually sort of along those lines, Missy. Was this expected or a surprise? Because when we look at, number of high school students alone transferring out was 121, more than those transferring in. And when I look at last year's transfer in and out, they were almost equal, 916 and 915. But this document, I don't know what the enrollment was in the fall of what would be 2 years ago, and then the end, just to kind of look at that. But I guess really back to my initial question was this expected at the high school level or not? Because we're talking about 30 to, 30, between 20 and 35 students at each high school, fewer.
I think we would need to talk to those principals. And I don't want to speculate, but with having us go to online learning and knowing that some kids did not enjoy that as much or feel as motivated as one of the pieces that came out, it'd be interesting to see if that's where we increased our loss of kids transferring out. But they really didn't have a new place to transfer to. So that's, probably worth looking at, Jennifer.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
I do want to go back to Rebecca's question and mention one thing. Since you did ask, how can the board utilize this data? One of the things that we will lean on the board is to be able to speak to the mobility in our district during this legislative session. One of the things that we struggle with, the state funding formula in North Dakota, especially when it comes to serving our students that are on IEPs, whenever a student transfers from one district to another, just the way the state funding formula is, the state takes a 75% deduct of those special education funds, and they don't transfer from district to district. So this has been something that we've been working with West Fargo on, and it's going to be an area for us to focus at the legislative session. So I think it would be really good for board members just to be aware of our mobility, and especially within how many kids we transfer back and forth with West Fargo, because every time that happens, we're taking a hit to special education revenues that we could be receiving as a district.
Very good. I don't see any other hands. Thank you, Missy. Staff report 3C, grant revenues and opportunities report. Looks like we have Ms. Jackie Gap.
So this is a new report. Sorry, Missy turned it off. A new report we put together. I hope to expand on it and make it better. Going forward, it became a little difficult because our actual grant writer left us. And we do have a new person hired who will be starting in July. So I had to do a little digging to try to find some information. But I think we got it all for the current year. So, grants in the writing, we do have a grant writer hired, and then we have, I also have an accountant who handles the fiscal side of those grants. And then throughout the district, grants are managed by a multitude of people at all levels within the district. So the first page just goes through kind of an introduction, some of the responsibilities of those positions, and just what the purpose is. So the purpose is just to give you kind of an overview for this year, and like I said, we'll hopefully expand on some items. The one thing I would like to expand on is what all did we apply for that we did not receive, and I just wasn't able to locate all of that information to get it to you in this report. But we receive grants under three methods, basically: formulary grants, which are our title funds. And so those are basically distributed based on a formula, most often are free and reduced levels that we have. So on page 2, you can see our entitlement funds that we do receive. So we do continue to receive these year after year. They are based on federal allocations. And the majority of them, all but one actually, are pass-through grants from the Department of Public Instruction. The only one that we receive directly from the federal government is our Indian Education Grant that we have. I have asterisks there, the ones that are part of the consolidated application. You hear that maybe throughout the year, as well as it does come before you for approval at the beginning of the school year. And then below, of course, just listed some of the descriptions, so you have a rough idea of what those funds are for and can be used for. No new funding really was received within the entitlement grants last year, the year recovering, and we expect allocations to be fairly similar going forward into 2021, but have not received those yet. Next are the competitive grants that we applied for. Some of these are federal, some are state, some are local. There's probably the two largest to discuss would be the Striving Readers Grant, which was a new grant. And then what will be coming is the closed grant, which is the one below it, the Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant. And although we were awarded, that's a 5-year grant, $800,000 in the current year, much of that was not spent. In fact, for quite a few of these, we'll have quite a bit of carryover going into next year, just due to closure and not being able to maybe carry out the activities that we had planned in those funds. So, and then that continues with a multitude of descriptions on a lot of the funding that took place throughout the year that we applied for. And I will go on to page 6. We did have a couple collaborative grants this past year. One was a community development block grant that we worked with the city on to replace and upgrade the playground at Washington Elementary. So if you've been by there, you will see it was a beautiful upgrade, actually. So it turned out very, very well. And the next one is Fargo, which is some energy monitoring that we have been working with NDSU on. I believe it's down at Davies,
and some of the other schools, some displays, just kind of working through that project with them as well to see what we can do regarding energy usage and education together. Then you can see on page 7, we have just kind of displayed, of the total funding we received. Obviously, the majority of that does come from federal sources, a small percentage from what we would deem local, United Way funding, those types of areas, and then state funding as well. And on page 8, which is the last page, if you're interested in knowing, well, what do we typically do with all of these funds, much like our general fund budget, the majority is factored in and spent on salaries and benefits for staff. And that majority of that is through those title funds. We do pay for quite a bit of staff in Title I, some in Title II. In our special education Part B funding, I believe we now dedicate all to staffing for that as well. And then just thought I'd give you at the bottom some historical information, where's funding gone. You can see federal funding has actually increased. The biggest jump though in the last few years really has been related to those literacy grants that we've received, because those were quite sizable that we had. And the rest is kind of staying stagnant as we go on. So hopefully we can continue to see federal go up. We like those sources to remain and increase annually. So with that, kind of a quick overview summary. If you have any questions, I will certainly try to answer.
Before we start, so we have a grant writer.
Yes.
And we all know that writing the grant is the smallest part of the work. So does this person also manage the reporting? Because these are quite cumbersome reports, I assume.
The individual we had previously in place and the one we have hired, yes, the expectation is they definitely assist with ensuring that we report on time, that we have the required information, so that person really works with whoever is part of the grant. Most of the time it's teaching and learning, to make sure that we have the data and we get the information and we track that information as well. Kaylin, who was our previous person, also made sure as we were monitored that we had all of the items in place to do that. And that would be another thing we should probably include going forward, is which grants were monitored. Sometimes we are monitored via desk audit. Many times they come out and visit us for a while. And run through programming and give us suggestions for improvement. So that would be some good information to include as well.
I see Brandy, Brian, Rebecca, David. In that order, I saw the hands.
Thanks to all of you for doing the grant work. It is hard work. I used to work at NDSU, and they did a lot of grant writing, and I know it's very time consuming. And then, like you said, just to keep all of the data and everything is also. So thank you for everything you guys do for that.
Thank you. I have to extend that to my staff, because at this point I am not as involved as I used to be in those. So,
Brian.
Just a simple question. Do you ever have to reap the title grants at all, or?
we have not.
Okay.
No.
What was that word? I missed it, Brian.
Reap.
Reap.
So you can, at times, you can take from one title grant into the other, so Title II-A into Title I,
Okay.
And do those, and we have never had the need to do that.
Thank you. Rebecca.
This is a compliment to build on a little bit what Brandy said. Part of your charge is to provide us with reports that we can easily understand. And I want to say that personally, I easily understand this report. And we have some other reports coming up in our meeting later this evening. The budget one is one of them. And that also, I want to say, is phenomenally presented. So thank you, and to the individuals that also helped with it.
Thank you.
Yes. Agreed. If you can make me understand, you're doing a great job. David.
I work hard on that.
David.
No, I too appreciate how well this is laid out. It is easy to see. I've got two questions. The first is out of curiosity more than anything. I know it's very common in a lot of school districts for all of the Title I teachers to be non-renewed every spring because they're unsure of the Title I funds. How iffy are Title I funds?
They have not been, in recent years, that iffy. I believe we do place a clause in anyone that is hired with grant funds, correct? Right. Just a clause saying that, just putting an employee on notice that you are paid through grant funding, and should that grant funding decrease or disappear, because we have had that happen in the past. Just so they have that notice and are aware of it. But I know we've always, if that has ever happened, really worked to make sure that we place those employees somewhere else within the district.
The competitive grants, $3.5 million, that's a significant amount of money, and that's really a good job. I'm wondering if we are applying for as many grants as we could, because it would certainly seem, if it were a manpower issue, it would be much to our benefit to hire another person to help if we could, jack that up to 5 or 6 million.
I wish. I think that would be doable. Some of the ones that are listed as competitive still fall under a lot of title programs and a lot of federal programs. I think of adult ed, for example, since we now are kind of a regional area where we, Jennifer Free is also in charge of Wapaton and assisting in West Fargo as well. It's still competitive in the nature that we're applying for with all the other adult ed centers in the state. And she does such a phenomenal job that we get quite a bit of money. So they're competitive, but many of these are limited to, through the state to school districts as well. I would guess there are also, though, a multitude of areas out there that, quite frankly, as you said, we just don't have the time to research and be looking at constantly to see if we can also fit them into what our vision and our strategic plan is as well, to make sure that everything goes together.
Brian?
Just one thing to add to David, my understanding is the REA with SEEK, and that is designed to write grants and get grants for the schools to help facilitate learning and teaching, so.
They administer a lot of grants for my organization, yeah. In fact, some of the state funds are required to be meted out through the regional education associations, to my knowledge. Okay, good report, good information.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we welcome to the podium President FEA, the FEA, Jennifer Mastrud. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. I will make this short and sweet because I know we have a very long agenda this evening. First of all, I just want to tell everybody on here who are going to be leaving the board, thank you so much for your dedication to public service in their community for the last 4 years. It takes a lot to put your name on a ballot, and I know this year it was 13 different people who were out there, and it was a very tough competitive field. So I truly, truly thank you, and I know every educator does in the community. So thank you for doing that. We know you're going to still be strong advocates of public education going forward. I just also wanted to talk to you about the preliminary budget. I know that that's going to be looked at tonight, and as we start to review that, I know that everything that we do within our school budget has to do with students, even to the lights, even to the food and nutrition, everything we do. And so as we look at that preliminary budget, make sure that it is directly student focused and what is going to be the strongest impact to our students. And ultimately, it does come down to the staff working with our students. So we thank you guys for putting in the due diligence to dig in and research those questions. And I know that we're working with Cabinet as well, with FEA, to make sure that we have those conversations. So I appreciate Rupak's time, and I appreciate Doug's time and everyone else's. So thank you guys for the efforts you guys put in the last 4 years. So that's it.
Are you not going to mention that we tried to meet yesterday and we figured out that every coffee shop in town is closed?
It is.
So
We tried to.
And so I got a tour of Ms. Masrud's fax room, and it was getting cleaned and sanitized, and we had a nice visit yesterday.
We did. I was letting her save that for her board report. But yeah, she got to see a school building in the process of being gutted and cleaned, with someone retiring and new people coming in. So she got to see the work that we do in the summer constantly. So it was a great conversation, and I know we look forward to that. And I found one coffee shop that's open. So,
Oh, good. Let me
yes,
know.
I will.
Thank you. Superintendent report, Dr. Gandhi.
Sure. Much to agreeing with what Jennifer said. I will also try to make this a little bit short because I know you'll be hearing from me a lot today during the business section. But I do also want to start by just acknowledging all of our board members that are going to be leaving the Board of Education and just expressing my gratitude and saying thank you. You know, being a board member is without a doubt public service, and you have made a tremendous amount of impact on the students of Fargo Public Schools. If there's one thing that I can leave you with is that the best decision you've ever made is hiring a superintendent. So just always know that, and I will always be grateful for that, and I'm sure my family will as well. So just thank you for your service, and just know that you have touched many, many lives, both in our students, parents, and throughout our community. So thank you very much. Couple of other quick things. One is with the approval of the consent agenda with the new HR addendum today, you'll see a resignation of a teacher. That resignation is going to eliminate the need for having a discharge for cause hearing. So once that consent agenda is approved, I know board members were asked to reserve some time in the upcoming weeks on your calendar, so you will no longer need that as well. So just kind of wanted to point that out. And then the last thing, I just wanted to take a moment here to publicly acknowledge one of our community partners and read a statement from our IT director, Bill Westrick, and that public partner is Midco. Midco's been absolutely phenomenal to work with during our time of transitioning to distance learning and making sure that they can help us address the opportunity gap for access for some of our families in need and make sure that technology was not a barrier for them not to receive education. So just a quick statement here from Bill, which said that while we were working on our remote learning plan in March, Midco was in constant communication with the state of North Dakota officials and Fargo Public Schools administration asking what they could do to help. Their decision to offer free internet access to our families in the Fargo region this past spring was a great help to our teachers, our students, and our families. And we're going to be sending an official letter to them as well, but I just wanted to publicly acknowledge them for providing their services for our neediest families at no cost. And that really allowed us to continue that education and make sure that access was not a barrier. So thank you very much to Midco.
Great, thank you. On to the consent agenda. I would entertain a motion to approve that with the exception of 4E. Christy, go ahead.
I move to the approval of the consent agenda with the HR addendum and the removal and the movement of 4E.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on the consent agenda? All those in favor, please vote by saying yes.
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 Any opposed? No. On to the business section. Item 5A, assignment of the canvassing committee. Typically, every year, the non-officer members of the governance committee are assigned to canvass the rest of the board members to seek whether they would like to put their name in the hat for the president or the vice president job. And so the non-president and the non-vice president did that, and we had assigned Rebecca, Christy, and Jim to do that. Rebecca being the only one not on the ballot, made sense to make her the chair. So therefore, this is more of an information only. Those three will be reaching out to all board members, and then Rebecca would give the report at the next school board meeting. Am I missing anything, guys? Okay, so if you're interested in a president or vice president position, if you haven't been contacted, make sure to reach out. Thank you. Business item 5B, RDO Building Purchase Agreement Memo Number 130. How would we like to introduce this?
I can do it.
Dr. Gandhi.
Sure. At the last meeting, the board authorized administration to make an offer on the old Western States building, also known as the RDO building for future district office needs. As you will see in your board memo packet, that offer was accepted verbally, and there is a purchase agreement that we are seeking for the board to approve. Upon approval of that purchase agreement, it will be executed, and we will then list the district office for sale.
Can I ask for some clarification on that quickly? Well, part of that motion was also to include the sale of this, the Red Owl warehouse. Okay, I thought that was cute that they
Yeah.
caught that in the newspaper. Jim, go ahead.
I'd like to move that we authorize the administration to execute the attached purchase agreement for $7.3 million for the RDO building and proceed with the earnest money deposit and list the district office for sale as indicated in board memo number 130.
Second.
Okay. Motion's on the floor. Questions? Go ahead, John.
From which of our funds will the earnest money come, and then where will the balance come?
Jackie, that's you.
I can, although Dr. Gandhi knows as well. We'll be paying for that out of the building fund. So we'll, once the agreement's signed and in place, which I'm assuming we will do prior to the year end, we will do the $1 million earnest money check, and the remainder will be paid when we close then in midwinter.
Great. I don't see any other hands or for discussion. I think we're ready for a roll call. Anne Marie.
Ani,
Yes.
Benson,
No.
Johnson,
Yes.
Knutson? Yes. Brian Nelson,
Yes.
Paulson,
Yes.
Rodenbacher,
Yes.
Ulrich,
Yes.
President Nelson?
Yes, motion carries. Item 5C, preliminary budget approval. Who wants to take that one? We're going to be hearing from Jackie a lot tonight, I assume?
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna start it off.
Okay, go for it.
We're gonna tag team a little bit with this,
Yeah.
I think. So I'm guessing that you will need me to advance the slide for you?
I have a clicker.
Or do you have a clicker? Okay, so you're good with that.
Maybe we should add a new boardroom projector to the board. So while the projector is warming up, I will just go at us and get us started a little bit. As you will see in your board materials, there is an extensive PowerPoint. I believe it's about 58 or 59 slides. I am not going to go through that entire PowerPoint. You have probably seen a lot of that information before as well, but I think I just wanted to use this process as we talk about the preliminary budget to talk about where we are as a district, how we build our preliminary budget, what's been done differently this year as well. I also want to just remind the board members that this is a process that starts now, but it doesn't end until the certified budget in September or October. So we do anticipate several revisions along the way. We continue to work with the planning committee, but we just kind of wanted to talk through the preliminary budget and provide that information both for board members and then anyone else that may be referencing tonight's meeting materials as well. So we just started off with just some basic information about our school district, so you're aware that what our focus is as we build our budget. Maybe I will need Jackie to, yeah. So as the PowerPoint gets pulled up, the first several slides are just basic information about Fargo Public Schools. And as a reminder that our budget, like Jennifer Masters said, it ultimately is going to focus on the over 11,000 students that we have in Fargo Public Schools. And they're going to be tied to the strategic initiatives that have been outlined on slide 4. And I included demographic information as well. Specifically, I wanted you to just remember and take a look at our demographic information on slide 10, which, this is working now, so I am working. We're going to talk a little bit about equity and inclusion in our budget, and I think at the last couple of board meetings I've talked about if that's going to be a focus for us as a district, then that's going to be something that you'll see as well. So just wanted to talk about the wide variety of students that we serve and just make sure that I'm putting that on the forefront as well. But really kind of the important information today is really about our school budget. And when we build our preliminary budget, we're not just referencing our general fund. We have several funds, and each of the funds have a specific purpose. So on slide 12, you will see all the different funds that make up the Fargo Public Schools budget, the different purposes that they serve, and then what the primary source of revenues are for those funds. The next slide talks through what the purpose of each of those funds are and what they're generally used for as well. Going to the general fund revenue, which is what we normally talk about, just a breakdown of what is our budgeted revenue by source, and you will see salaries and benefits continue to make up about 80%, or I'm sorry, this is our general fund revenue source. State revenue is about 60%, and then about 7% federal, and then you'll see about 30% from property taxes. As board members are aware, each legislative session, when the funding formula gets updated or the districts are given what the per pupil rate is going to be for the district, there is a number that's determined by legislative session, but then we also have to consider the equalization factor and what the realized impact of that is going to be on each school district budget. So the best example that I can give you is starting over here, which is, as you look through the legislative session, you will see in 2021, school districts are intended to receive $10,036 for per pupil students. But then when you look at the equalization impact, because of the state formula and what it ultimately comes down to, it's about $8,000 for us as a school district. Property taxes end up being about 30% of our funding through local property taxes. As board members are aware that we have the ability to levy up to 127 mills. We're currently levying 126 mills. And I am going through this rather quickly because I want to be able to get through our budget as well. So talking about our distribution of resources, and this is where I jumped ahead a little bit earlier, just talking about where our investment is going to be and continue to be as a district. Salaries and benefits continue to be our number one priority, as we know the impact of our personnel on making sure that we are able to provide the services that we need to as an organization. And then you'll see all of our other expenditures by source as a district. As a district, we use two main methods for distributing our resources to schools. We use a staff allocation model and a student-based budgeting model. The staff allocation model takes a look at consideration for things such as what is the guiding principles that we have around class size and looking at our enrollment projections and then determining staff allocation accordingly. A student-based budgeting model allows us as a district to be able to look at the needs of each individual school and allow them to be able to manage a budget based on the amount of students that they serve, and then create their budgets accordingly. So this year, we took a little bit of a different approach in our budgeting process. And that approach is bringing back a practice that we've done in the past as a school district, which is an emerging needs process. Really, the intent of this process this year was to create a more collaborative budget district-wide. Unfortunately, we still have some room to grow this year because COVID happened, and our ability to communicate and get some information out there didn't work as smooth or seamless as we want, but it's a process that we want to continue to grow and work on as we move forward. So one of the things that we did this year is really allowed multiple stakeholders throughout the district to provide an opportunity about what are emerging needs and priorities that we should see in our budget. And like I said before, this provided a more different and collaborative approach, but it was impacted by COVID-19. Some of the challenges with the process this year was just the timing of the budget and then the school closures. So once we had really determined from a variety of stakeholders, these are all the emerging needs that we have in our school district that different individuals think should take place or be put into our budget. We went through what we call a force matrix process. And what that force matrix does is it allows you to take each of the emerging needs that was on that list and then rank it against each of the other emerging needs. And so we really get a true idea of when you have conflicting budget priorities, what do stakeholders in our district value one over the other? Individuals that were given an opportunity to weigh in and take the emerging needs process were all of our staff members and board members as well. Some of the challenges with the process this year, like I referred to already, was the timing. I think the survey went out on the last day of school, and we'd want to backtrack that a little bit moving forward, but then just also the complications of the force matrix. So as board members, if you took it, I know we try to provide some detailed instructions, but we received some feedback on just that being a complicated process. So how can we smooth that out moving forward as well? What you're going to see on the next slides are everything that was originally on the emerging needs. So some of the things that was requested from our stakeholders, whether it's teachers or through a meeting that we had with the FEA building representatives or through our principals that made its way to the emerging needs, were everything that you will see on the following slides. I want to stop here first because I want to make sure that all the board members are aware that we're always going to start building our preliminary budget with the required staffing that we need. I'm going to address this a little bit later in our preliminary budget as well, but we understand the impact of our teaching staff and our paraprofessionals, so we always build in what we think is the required based off our staff allocation model, and we never want any of the emerging needs to come at the cost of teaching or support staff that we need at the district. So our job as administration is to make sure that we're working around the teaching needs that we have, so our budgets are always going to start with that. This is why this slide is labeled as a required new staffing, and then all of the emerging needs afterwards were listed as proposed. So other proposals that you'll see for emerging needs outside of the required new staffing were elementary dean of students, a proposal for a middle school EL science teacher, some changes to Woodrow Wilson staffing, and then I'm just going to work through several of these, and you'll see the price associated with each of these emerging needs. And as I referred to earlier, what we had done is we had sent out all of the emerging needs list on a forced matrix for our staff to weigh in on. What you see on slide 43 is the results of the force matrix rankings. After reviewing the force matrix rankings, Cabinet had a conversation, and we took a conversation, took a look at the rankings, and we made a recommendation for just this initial conversation starting this budget. And what we recommended is to start with AI, all the different rows that you'll see that have a check mark next to them, and then also include a position for a director of equity and inclusion. And one of the reasons that we're proposing this position that was not originally on the force matrix, in total honesty, is because the conversation has been a result of some of the conversations that we've had in our community with current events. And one of the things that we've realized is that this is a gap for us in our district, just based on recent events. And every year at the end of the school year, I have a chance to visit with every school principal at their building and just have a conversation with them about what's on the horizon for them, what are their needs, what can district office do to support. And one of the things that we heard is that as we continue to engage in this conversation in our community around race, equity, and inclusion, when our students return to us in the fall and when school opens up again, we need support in how to have those conversations. As educators, as all of you know, probably have some of the biggest hearts and want one of the most inclusive environments, but at the same point, this is something that as a society we need to talk about with some of the current events happening, whether there's implicit bias work that we need to do as a district or just looking at systemic areas in which students or individuals don't feel inclusive in our environment. Are there gaps? So understanding that need and coupling it with some of the conversations that we've had around current events, we had decided that although this wasn't at the time presented, because it's a need that came up later, we thought it was important to include that. And I'm going to include another slide about specifically what the Director of Equity and Inclusion would do and what some of the target points would be for that position.
Could you stop here for just a minute? So the ones that you marked X's, those are ones we don't intend, or we may hire those positions if money is available?
Currently those are positions that are not built into this preliminary budget.
What is item 8G, Check and Connect?
So Check and Connect is a program that was offered through Charism, an organization that's a nonprofit, or that was a nonprofit. That organization has since then become part of the Boys and Girls Club of in our community. And that program was funded partially through United Way, and only served a group of students at, I think, you'll see here, Jefferson, Ed Clapp, and Carl Ben Allison, but it was that program.
I talked to, when I had Jefferson, I talked to Brad Franklin about this. Isn't this where the person would go into the homes and whatever? That, he thought that was a tremendous benefit. Will that be, now that yours has taken over, will that cease to exist?
They had 3 program arms at Charism. One was their out-of-school programming. That's the program we absorbed. One was the Check and Connect program. That's what Fargo Public Schools is absorbing with the assistance of United Way funding for a 3-year grant. And then they also had a grocery assistance program, and that was taken over by their community homes. So this was too much of a mission creep for us. So it makes sense for it to continue through the district, and it is based off of some great models out of, I forget the community, but it's a great program for our kids, absolutely. And it gets I mean, you're right, it goes to, their mentors will go to the home and make sure that the kids get to school. They really kind of individualized caseworkers. It's a tremendous program.
And then, just so you're aware, Jefferson also has a 4th program that's done completely in-house, and that's their Lunch Buddy program, in which each of the students are also assigned a mentor with someone from the community, and they come in and have lunch with them as well. So this was really just our conversation as cabinet as we built the preliminary budget, and just wanted to spend the next couple of slides going through the justification. So the Director of Equity and Inclusion, and I really want to be very specific about the purpose of this position and make sure that it's directly aligned to our strategic plan. The purpose of the Director of Equity and Inclusion Director of Equity and Inclusion position is really to have someone that oversees and is creating a strategic plan for our district around specific areas that we have identified as gaps. Some of those areas I can talk to right now that we know already include graduation rates for our Native American students, looking at our out-of-school suspension rates and seeing are we disproportionate there, and looking at other target of indicators that we have as well. So really the goal for this position would be during their first year in Fargo Public Schools, not only to help with what I mentioned earlier, making sure that our teachers, our principals, and our staff are equipped with the professional development and are able to support as we work and move towards making sure that we're creating a more inclusive environment, but then also spend that first year identifying markers that they want. So similar that we have a 5-year MTSS plan, a 5-year teaching and learning plan, a 5-year information technology plan, they would be responsible for creating a 5-year equity and inclusion plan in our district. And in that plan, they would have to identify what are some gaps that we want to close over the next 5 years. That just as we look at us as a school system, there are things that we need to see that currently that we need to do differently, or that might require a shift in our resources or allocation. This person would oversee our Title I program, which serves our homeless population as well. They would oversee our Indian education program as well. And so they would have that supervisory role. But fundamentally, this position would also be part of the school improvement process. So there is a book in literature, K-12 literature, called Equity Audits for Excellent Schools, and they give you a protocol on how to use equity audits. And what equity audits is creating a plan for school improvement based on certain gaps that you want to close. The best example that I can give you, because it's going to reference one of the other justifications that we have, is in K-12 education, one of the things that you will see is out-of-school suspension for kindergarten through 2nd grade students is often at a disproportionate rate across the nation. You will see that more students of color and male students are suspended out of school when they're 5, 6, or 7 years old. Well, what research will tell you is that when you take a look at why, is that there are times when students need to be removed from the classroom, but when they're 5, 6, and 7 years old, there isn't much research to show that those students in out-of-school suspension is going to cause a reform in behavior. However, that tool is successful when it's used as an opportunity to engage the parent that you otherwise might not have an opportunity to engage that parent. However, that becomes an equity issue, because when you have parents that are coming from low SES backgrounds that are working around the clock that don't have the ability to take that time off to engage with the school and use to spend their 5, 6, or 7-year-old student, it creates a bigger distrust with the school environment, and it causes them not to be able to participate at the level you want. So you're punishing the parent and the student in a way that you don't want to do. That doesn't lead to that reform in behavior. So it's work around areas such as that as a school district that we know that there's some areas and opportunities for growth that we have that this position would be in charge of doing. One of the things that they would be directly working with would be the dean of students. So last year, we started a transition to move towards an elementary dean of students, and we've talked extensively about that position and just the need to transition that position from the administrative intern program that we have to a more sustainable model for elementary dean of students. So all the reasons that we've talked about last year when we made that transition as part of the 3-year plan, those still stand. However, it is also our expectation that if we were to move forward with this budget this year, that every elementary school that does have a dean of students moving forward in Fargo Public Schools, they would work with Missy to make sure that, A, they're beginning, if they haven't already, restorative practices, which is part of our 5-year MTSSB plan. But then they're also going to work towards phasing out to reduce, and if not eliminate, we understand there's unique circumstances, K2 suspensions. You have an additional administrative personnel that can engage in restorative practices or work when a student's not fit for that classroom at that time. How can we find an appropriate way to, whether it's building an in-school program for those students in those settings or doing something different, so we can still support our students and our staff, but we're not creating those bigger equity issues. So any administrative position that we would recommend at the school level this year that would be part of our budget, we would expect that equity and inclusion become part of their portfolio, that they conduct the work for doing equity audits, and then that would be part of the school improvement plans moving forward as well. So that's going to be an expectation for some of the justifications that we have as well. Most of the things that we're suggesting here are things that did rise to the top of the force matrix, so we are aligned to that as well, and that's one of the reasons that we picked some of these things. The next would just be the part-time to full-time strategists. As you know, that our strategists help with interventions and also help with becoming data coaches, and it's just an important position in our district. Woodrow Wilson had some proposed changes that also made the list, and those were somewhat cost neutral, but really important and aligned to some of the work that those positions were already doing. And then one of the things that's built into our middle school level, our position right now is a request to change the middle school level deans to assistant principals. And this is a conversation that I'm having with FEA President Mastert as well. And when we're open to this conversation about whether this is appropriate or not, because this was one of the items that didn't necessarily make it to the top of the list that we had suggested. But one of the reasons that we thought it was important was going back to that equity and inclusion work, is that if we are going to make a transition from the middle school level deans to a middle school level assistant principal position, we would also expect that person to take on an equity and inclusion portfolio and make that part of the school improvement process at the middle school level as well. However, we're going to continue to have that conversation and see if that's the direction we want to move. One of the things that we're hearing is that the deans of students at the middle school level have the exact same portfolios besides formal observations as the middle school assistant principals, and that moving deans would align more to the middle school assistant principals and what they're doing, and that it would also be competitive compared to neighboring districts or other districts across the state, and what they're offering for their middle school level administrators. Dr. Gross is working with our middle school administrators to do an analysis and saying what is being offered across the state and what is appropriate. So when we have that data, we can share that with the board as well as we go through this budget building process. The next couple of slides, I just wanted to include these slides that talk a little bit about perception versus reality, because I think in our district, knowing that long-term sustainability for our budget is going to continue to be an issue. I also want us to be able to make sure that we're able to talk about our narrative a little bit. And I started with a quote that says, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," because I think sometimes we are doing a disservice to our students by by pointing the finger at each other. And the reality of the situation is that we know that our resources as a school district are finite, and we have to be able to look at the long-term planning as well. But at the same point, I think I do want to clarify some of the things that have been mentioned either in the past by board or FEA or as well, and just say that it is not the position of administration to request emerging needs each year at the cost of staff expenses or staff salary raises at all. And I want to clarify that by just saying, because we have a negotiated agreement in place, so we know what we're going to spend on salaries and benefits, and then we're going to build our emerging needs budget at the same point. We plan on continuing that process moving forward as well, so I wanted to include that. And then also just include a point about oftentimes it is perceived that as we add administrators to the district, it is at the cost of our support staff, and that is not the intent of administration at all. We do fundamentally believe that our administrators exist in this district to support all of our students, and that happens through supporting our staff. And if we see that there's a need for an administrative role, we want that to make sure that that role has a direct impact in working with our teachers or support staff, and fundamentally making an impact on student achievement. So President Masters and I have had a conversation about that as well, and if it's something that doesn't look successful in our district, then we can revisit those roles and say what is something that needs to look differently. But the best example we can give is last year we revisited the roles of our area service coordinators. Those positions used to be district office located positions, and they were decentralized to the campus level to be a greater level of support to our special education teachers. And it was the expectation, and I think that has happened, that this past year, that for our high-level IEPs and for some of our more engaging families, the area service coordinators can take a more response role to help the teachers, so the teachers can also focus on their academic instruction. And we are completely committed to continuing to do that work and make sure that we don't add any administrative positions at the cost of teaching staff in our district. It is because we see that there's a need, and we understand that there's a gap for both, and there are sometimes where we need positions to support our teaching staff, and those are going to be the recommendations that we make. So that's just a high-level overview of our budget. And if I were to break down our budget, that was our preliminary budget that's been built this year so far in terms of what are the priorities. I would say first is diversity, inclusion, and equity. But then second thing is just higher expectations on the schools, as we've talked about, to continue to provide service to address students, whether it's mental health or challenging student behaviors. We're trying to create our budget to reflect that we want to hit these priorities in Fargo Public Schools because we understand that these are the issues that our teachers are facing and that all of our staff are facing as well. So we're trying to provide them with the support we can. So that is really just an overview of some of the emerging needs that were built into the preliminary budget. And as we go through the budget building process between now and when it's certified, some of the things that we would talk about would be, we've already had some of this conversation at the board level, potential adjustments and what are areas that we can take a look at as a district, whether there's some student experiences that we currently offer in our district that we can revisit at the board level, or even looking at some of the transportation services that we offer. Do we want to continue providing that at that level or not? So those are some of the things that we would have board level conversations as we go through about potential budget adjustments. And then lastly, I've mentioned this before as well, as we enter this next legislative session, what are some needs that we want to continue advocating for? One is going to be social emotional learning, safety and health-based services and staffing, and then continuing to work with our underfunded programs. So that's just a little bit narrative around our budget process, but you will see our budget and for each of the funds located on the following pages, and then I will hand it over to Jackie to walk through the numbers.
Can I ask a quick question? Just about the diversity and inclusion administrative position, which seems very timely. Would you see that, because I have an inclusion specialist, but that is also maybe some kids that are detached, or the SEL, or the trauma, some that are with high ACEs scores. Would that eventually phase into that, or would that start right from the beginning, or ever?
So we have someone working on, we have a 5-year plan for MTSSB, and we know that diversity and inclusion has a place with social emotional learning.
Right.
And I think there would be some level of integration there as well. So there is definitely going to be work that we need to do, and I think this position would look at different aspects of our organization and see where does some of that work naturally fit in, whether it's curriculum or what the case may be. I would also just caution us to say that if we hire this position, it needs to be just beyond, I actually have an article here that I'll share with the board as well. It needs to go just beyond a position saying, okay, we hired an equity position or we hired a diversity position. And so Fargo Public Schools has addressed racism, or we've addressed students that don't feel inclusive. That's not what the purpose of the position is. Although that's a subject area of the position, the purpose of the position is to strategically look at our strategic plan and say, what are some goals that we're not meeting? What are some gaps in services that we're not meeting? And let's create a 5-year plan accordingly. So right now we see a gap in graduation rates between one group of students and another. Why is that? Is that because we're trying to provide the same instructional environment and it's not working with one group of kids? And what can we do differently? Well, let's look at our special education identification rates and let's create strategic plans around that. So it is a broad topic position, but the position would have a very focused job of looking at specific gaps of things that we do. Some things, we provide a very high quality education in Fargo Public Schools, but we know that we can't provide the same educational experience to everyone. So for some of the students, for who we can do better, how do we get there? And that's the purpose of this position.
That's helpful. All right, Jackie.
President Nelson, if I may, does anyone need a break before we delve into the rest of this, if would like, or are we good to go?
You're nodding? Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. She wants us to pay full attention to when she's speaking. Okay, we are back in session. We are waiting to hear from Jackie Gap. She's going to run us through her, or the Planning Committee's preliminary budget for 2021.
All right, so we will start with the general fund budget and go through each fund then and the significant assumptions that have been placed in as of now. I would like to point out the general fund budget you have in front of you does not include any grant funds. When we bring it back to you the next time, we will have those numbers for you, but we haven't received many of our allocation amounts yet, so we just don't quite know what they are at this point. Although we don't anticipate any huge changes. But so to start off with property tax revenue, the budget includes a projected 4% increase in taxable values. We will wait to get some finalized or more solidified numbers from the city and county, probably end of July. We'll have some a little more solid numbers. I would like to remind you, we have not changed the mills. It is 126.78 that will be levied. And we do factor in a 5% discount just because the majority of taxpayers in our area do take advantage of that early payment discount. So we tend to discount ours just to make sure we're covered for that. As we go down the line, you know, are anticipating lower interest bearing rates on our investments that we do have, just with market conditions as well, which can be good on the debt side and not as good on the revenue side for us. So just anticipating that tick down a little bit. As we get into the local revenue area, rental income for us, of course, has also been decreased. A significant amount of that does come from Blue Stem over in Moorhead, and with Minnesota still being closed and the uncertainty of knowing if they'll be able to hold concerts, that line for now has been decreased as well. And then if you remember, we did have what I'd call an extra house to sell due to timing for our vocational education houses this past year. So next year, that number is just less because we will have one house at each location to sell. Per pupil aid from the state, we discussed on the one slide, it's goes up 2% this year to $10,036. This budget includes a small increase in ADM at this point. I pulled the data and we'll be reviewing that for the current year. That's due on June 30th for our regular year. So hopeful that it will come out a little higher than that, but until we get that finalized and actually until DPI approves it, as we've talked in the past, not until November, but we'll try to scrub it as clean as we can so we know where we're sitting with that. On-time funding, the first part of it does come into play in 2021. So we will receive additional dollars based on our fall enrollment. And for us, our fall enrollment, much like we talked with the mobility report, our fall enrollment is higher than we usually end up in the spring. So for next year, we're going to receive some additional monies because of that. The following year, so when we get to 2022, there'll be the offset back for that. And that will continue to kind of go back and forth as we go forward. So we'll just watch that as the full effect of the on-time funding is implemented. Transportation aid, anticipating a decrease. School ended on March 13th. And so we had no additional routes, therefore we can't claim those routes or mileage, and that was about a third of the year. So just anticipating the decrease in revenue due to that. So we go, that's pretty much the main items in the revenue side. Are there any questions on that before we proceed?
I've got John and then David.
This does not include any of the potential monies coming from the new safety or behavioral health monies the legislature approved last session?
No, not at this time. If we, when that comes through, because they haven't even opened it up for application, I believe, and that is going to be based on our Medicaid revenue that we have. So I'm not quite sure when that funding comes through, if that will be accounted for like a grant. So we can separate it and easily show that if we have the revenue in, we did spend those monies on applicable, health issues or wellness.
David, did you have a question?
Yeah, so Jackie, our revenue from the state for transportation went down?
So we'll be paid next year on the routes and mileage that we incurred the current year. So school, since school ceased, we had half of March, April, and May where we provided no transportation to students, so we cannot claim that as funding. Unless something should come through the legislature or somehow through the governor that will change that. So for 2021, we will receive less aid because it will be based on 2020.
We still had to honor a contract from Valley Bus, didn't we?
Our contract for Valley Bus stipulated that we would pay at a 50% rate.
Quick question on that too, on the revenue side. So COVID dollars, 3.3 million, do we have to apply for those as a grant, or are they already in this budget?
So they are not in this budget because they will be included as a grant because we have to track them separately.
Okay.
We're in the process of getting our plan together and submitted, so that will be to come.
Hence the reason this is an interim budget.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
All right,
Robin?
do we- oh, sorry.
Sure,
Robin.
go ahead, Jennifer.
Thank you. So Jackie, I have a question. You mentioned that based on historical trends and now with on-time funding, this is going to be, this will affect the budget differently moving forward, or budget planning. Will that sort of enrollment assumption that, you expect to see maybe lower numbers based on your projections in the spring, will that somehow be built into the budget building process from the beginning then, so that we're not surprised in the end when the next year rolls around and we have to pay some of that back, essentially?
So just remember that for next year, for 2021, everything we're paid on is what occurred in 2020. So what occurred in the current year. So next year, we will know what our fall enrollment will be. That will be plugged in. So I would anticipate more of those changes will be known as we go into the 2022 budget and further on. Because since we're always paid in arrears basically on our units, it's difficult to know going forward what that will be until we close the school year next year.
Yes, I watched the interim legislative session, the funding session, which was fairly exciting, but to Jennifer's point, it didn't look like we'd have to have some paybacks if those students left.
And I am anticipating that.
Yeah.
I believe the initial calculation is maybe an increase in 88 units for the on-time funding. But then as that comes into play into spring, if it's lower, we'll have to pay that back the next year. So now it's just going to be a juggling of timing for the remainder of the term until, unless it changes legislatively.
Any more questions on revenue? Brian, do you have a question on revenue?
I was just gonna add to David, he had a question on the transportation, and the way it sounds to me, they're going to, as a state, superintendents are gonna put together the amount of dollars we lost in the transportation and try to recoup those in the next legislative session, as I understand it.
Makes sense. John?
I just wanted to make sure I have full understanding of something, and it can trip me up sometimes. When we look at our local property tax revenue, and we say the percent change is just about 4%, that is only a 1% increase for our overall revenue, right? Since local revenue is only about 30% of our budget. And so even if local revenue goes up 4%, that doesn't mean that our overall revenue is going up 4%.
Correct.
Okay. Overall, our revenue is going up 2.7-ish.
Right, and a portion of that is related to the increase in property values.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. On to
On
expenditures?
to expenditures. As salary and benefits are the majority of this budget, what I've done is, as we know what the contracts and the matrix will be for 2021, I took all of our current staff that we had in place and moved them forward on their schedule. And that included all staff, all hourly staff as well, to calculate what that increase would be, and for all of the salary lines. And then in addition to that, the required positions that we presented on the slideshow have been added, as well as the proposed checked positions that we came down to on the budget priorities sheet. So those are included in here. In benefits, the majority benefits are based off of salary increases. I anticipated a 6% increase in health insurance. That is another area, of course, that we will not know until fall hits, where we'll be sitting with that. So I would anticipate that there may be some additional adjustments there as well. So I'm going to stop there with salary and benefits and take any questions you may have on that, since that's the largest area of our expenditure budget.
I have a question, Robin.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Jackie, under operations and maintenance, did the increased cost projections as a result of purchasing RDO, are they included in here?
No, they are not. I would anticipate that from a staffing standpoint, that the individual that we have who maintains our district office staffing would be moved over with us. And so I don't at this point anticipate that we would have additional custodial staffing. And if you look at, I'm glad you kind of pointed out the maintenance lines a little bit. There are 3 lines, they're 124, 125, and 126. There looks to be a lot of ups and downs in those. Most of that is related to getting our employees properly classified. So Amanda, one of Doug's staff, has really worked hard to clean up and make sure that we're properly classifying our part-time from our full-time in these line items. So the net difference of those 3 isn't as large as if you're just looking at the one line that's almost 170,000. So it's a continual process with us. We have a lot of employees who go in and out, and to make sure that we're consistently classifying and coding them where they belong.
Do we have an estimate based on the documentation that was put together in terms of around the operations and maintenance costs attributed to that building, what that line, how much it will increase?
Those costs will be mostly in utilities in that area. And I believe when we discussed initially this building, there were increased costs in there, and some of those have been accounted for. I need to gather some more concrete information on those costs before I fully would estimate that, because they seem a little high compared to what we use to operate this building. It is larger, but it's not that much larger, where utilities costs to me would be triple. So more to come on that.
David?
Okay, thank you.
Jackie, on the first line where administration, you're expecting a 10% increase as opposed to 6.6 for instruction in teachers. Deans of students are under the teaching contract, aren't they? So when they're switched over to an assistant principal or whatever, is that why there's such an increase?
So our individuals who were administrative interns are in the teacher line, in line 112. So if those positions, or when those positions are converted to an elementary dean position, now those costs will be in the administrator line in 111. And what was your other one? So the same thing if the director of equity inclusion would be the addition in the 111 line, as well as if we have included the adjustment from deans at the middle level to assistant principals as well. I have to remember my terminology, all that. So all of that is rolled into that line. So you're going to see more of an increase due to the added positions than you are because of a pay increase for individual people.
Okay, go ahead.
Good. All right, we'll move down into the other fun stuff then that we have. So what happens also during the process is all directors and department heads do submit to me their estimated costs for the remaining lines in the budget. So they don't necessarily submit their salary and benefits information. We go through a different process for that. But they do submit for the remainder of their costs for their areas. And so that is really an accumulation of all of that data. They get a sheet to fill out, they send it back, we gather it all together and get it into the system for them. So going through the purchased services area, the main item is really contracted instructional services. A lot of that stemmed from, you will see, as we close out this current year, we had to contract for quite a bit of special education services for many of our students. And so I will be bringing a budget revision due to that. And so that increase is just really trying to be reflective of those costs that we probably will be incurring for those students. Once the Explorer Academy is open and we determine how we're providing all of that, I think some things may change in that area as well. But that's another year after the fact. So, and then the other area is instructional license agreements. Really a lot of that will be due to online learning, distance learning, and I know at the elementary level, deciding what platform that may be. And so we will have some additional costs to license those applications for our teachers to be able to use to contact our students during that process. As we get into the operating and repair expenses, and Jennifer, this is where I will gather some more concrete data and make sure that we're covered for just the general operational costs if there are an increase moving from this building to the RDO building. And that would be half a year as well. Not anticipating we move until January probably. Quite a few decreases in these areas. I think just people really also took a good look at their budgets this year. Dr. Gandhi tasked everyone with, let's try to decrease your budget 6% over the next 3 years. And that would be a lot in these areas. So I feel like people really took that seriously and did a hard look at it as well.
Jackie, before you go
Yep,
on.
go ahead.
And this is going to cross over into several of the areas that you're going to talk about next, but partially back in staffing. We know it's going to be more expensive to open in the fall because we are going to have increased cleaning, possibly more staff to clean, a lot of PPE to purchase, and it's been very expensive for me to reopen serving youth. So are those factored into any of these?
Those are not at this point, and the reason being, we do not have the plan yet in place for how we're going to open, and not knowing from the governor at what level we can reopen. So those will begin to be factored in as you start to see this budget move forward to your approval in August.
And to that point, the graphic that Dr. Gandhi handed out at the last board meeting, when I deducted some of the pieces and made it more relevant to our district, it was about $400 more per student.
Right, and
It's like a $5.7 million hit to our district.
could very well be very extensive. And at that point, I think, depending on how that looks and what will be necessary for us, we do have available the ESSER funds, the CARES Act funding as well that we can utilize for that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, and I was just going to say, some of the things that we know, regardless of what that level is going to be part of our CARES Act plan that we've shared already and that we're building out right now, which does custodial is a part of that, teaching and learning is a part of that, and then obviously IT is a big part of that as well.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Brian.
As I understand it too, the telephone companies won't be providing the internet this coming year?
The program that was already in place ended June 30th. However, we have started conversations for a variety of different options with at least two of the major service providers in the area. Bill's actually continuing to talk with them about extended opportunities, to get the parents that they did serve during this time, what they're able to do moving forward starting July 1st, or if that's something the district would have to pay for, what would that cost look like? So we're doing that work, and some of them are open to some conversations about what does this look like if we continue with distance learning.
We'll get into the next area, which is our transportation and travel. As you'll see later on the agenda, we have some other things we need to discuss regarding the Valley Bus contract and how we proceed with that. So these are rough numbers, of course, as we haven't finalized a new contract for that yet. Anticipating currently that contract has a 3% inflator in it roughly. There's also some travel for students in here. It is the year for the high schools to take their every other year music trip as well. So those costs are in here as well. Just got our quotes as well, so that hasn't been updated for our insurance. For the district, I have asked them to give us the quotes because we will be bringing online then another building. So these numbers will become adjusted as well as we go forward once I get that information from them to add the RDO building for that. You know, when we get into tuition, it's such an unknown. It really depends on which students come to us. So it's a kind of a shot in the dark, but it has seemed like we see an increasing amount of students who come to us in special education to receive their education. So anticipate that some of that will continue to increase as our costs increase in those areas as well. Supplies and materials. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Jackie, student transportation, Live 510, and then there's contracted regular routes. So is the student transportation, I think that dollar amount is in line with the last proposal around boundary change. So is that attributed, that $78,000 to those added routes?
No, that line really is used for more of the building level transportation that we do. So that's where, when I talked about the high school music departments doing their trips, that's where their transportation ends up getting coded. And they do have a budget of about $50,000 for that when it occurs. So that's really the majority of that increase.
Okay, so where's the added increase then? Is it for the change? Is it for the under contracted regular routes, or where would
Correct.
you see that?
Yep, it's in contracted
Okay,
regular
thank you.
routes. Okay, and then as we get into supplies and materials, and this again is where our electricity costs are, and we have narrowed those down a little bit, but we'll definitely take a look at if we have any increased costs in that area that need to be added back into here. Supplies, you know, we do have an increase there, and that is mostly attributed, I think, to how we ended and some of the items we needed to purchase and realizing that we will have to purchase, right? We know we need to purchase masks. We know we're going to have some more supplies needs in the area of sanitation. As you go through those items, really between textbooks, library books, and workbooks, those all kind of tend to work together many times. So you'll see overall, when you place them together, not an extremely large increase in there. It's just a matter of how the teaching and learning department really ends up distributing those funds once they come through. As we get down to equipment, you know, that is truly based on department needs, what comes in. And so, again, people took a look, and I did not receive requests for items that, you know, really probably aren't necessary at this time. A lot of this area ends up being in our operations area maintenance. When one of those vehicles or plows go down, they're quite spendy to replace. But we do have some needs in that area that we need to take care of. And then technology equipment increase as we restored Mr. Westrick's budget. He took one for the team this past year and decreased it. And we definitely know that he will, of all line items, probably maybe incur the highest increase. And as we finalize plans for one-to-one for elementary, this number may change as well before we finalize the budget. Some of those dollars we are anticipating using CARES Act for though, so this may be a pretty solid number, but, yeah, and that's kind of it. Then, of course, if you look at the very last line, line 920, this is where the final building authority bond, the large payment is now done going into 2021, and I believe it has 3 years of about a $300,000 payment still remaining, and then it will be paid off. So that is what really accounts for the difference in the fund transfer line. The other items that are in that fund transfer line are to nutrition services for milk, and the other area is student activities budget. So,
Budget process question on the
Yes.
general. So we talked about emerging needs, and that's of course adding to the budget. And Dr. Gandhi briefly talked about it. We are also going to look at standard of efforts and are we offering too much? Where I expect there will be a forced choice type model for people to determine where we're heavy. And I want everybody to know that we're not just adding to the budget, but we're also probably going to have to decrease some things. But there will be plenty of public feedback. When do you expect that to happen within this process?
you know, again, timing is just not working to our
I
favor
know.
this year with everything that happened. I think we need a lot of conversation. I think at the board level as well regarding some of the items that we have placed on that list. It may not mean that we stop doing some of the experiences that we have provided for our students, but we may need to look at adjusting those. You know, I think as we get into, you know, June's over, so it's going to have to be fairly soon, within the next couple of weeks, but I'm really cautious about not being able, and that's what happened with the other matrix as well, really not being able to explain to people what they all mean. And so do you really get good results out of that when you aren't able to provide all the background information?
And this was where I referred to the standard of efforts document, that this is going to be helpful in this process. Thank you. Any other questions on the general? I got Rupak and David.
One thing I'll just mention is as you talk about budget adjustments during this process, what I included in the slide are the things that would come to a board level conversation. That doesn't mean that administratively we're not already looking at other adjustments that we could do. The best example I can give you is cabinets worked with FEA, and we're going to continue working with our human resources department to look at our own in-house professional development opportunities and the sub rates, and teaching and learning is creating a new goal on that. That would be a reduction in expenditure next year as well. So the things that administratively that we can change to look at our budget for next year, those weren't shared on the slide. I just shared the things that we need to have a board level conversation about, but we're taking a look at some of those things as well, and that'll be some of this process. Last year, the board also authorized administration starting this upcoming school year. We talked a little bit about credit card fees and the processing fees. That's going to have an impact moving forward as we build the budget as well. So there's some things that's already been done and some things that we are doing in-house, but what I shared on the slides were things that require board conversation.
That's helpful. David, did you have a question?
Jackie, we're talking about 2020-21. When are we going to know what effect the COVID-19 closure had on 2020? Did it cost us more? Did it save us money as a district?
Once we close out the year, I should be able to give you a good idea on that. So we usually close out the year probably the third week of July. So I can definitely give you some more information on that. Of course, we saved money in some areas, but incurred costs in the others. So I would like to be able to present kind of both those sides to all of you, so you can see, you know, maybe didn't expend that much in transportation that we would have normally, but on the other side, it cost us a lot more to have people come in and clean and sanitize. So I'll make sure to get that to you.
My organization took a 5% hit. deficit spend. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Brandy and Rebecca.
I just want to say thank you guys so much. You guys always supply such great reports to us, and I know it's a lot of hard work. So if you could please thank your staff as well as yourself, and just let everybody know that we do appreciate everything you guys do for us.
Thank you. I will be sure to pass that along. They do great work. So.
Well said. Rebecca, did you have your hand up?
I did, yep. So we talked during the break, just a little bit. I had some questions regarding the salary range for the Director of Equity and Inclusion, and I learned that we have that as a position open now within the district. So which I think is wonderful, thank you, but it illustrates that it wasn't only a funding recommendation from Cabinet, it's that we are committed as a district, from my understanding, to have someone working in that position within the district. So while the numbers are here for the budget in terms of a draft, there are obviously certain positions that we're really planning on retaining. So if there's any other discussion that needs to happen on that regard or explanation, I would just offer that opportunity.
Yeah, Rebecca, thank you for pointing that out. All of the things that are in the proposed budget, the elementary deans and the other things, we have not posted for those. We were waiting for the discussion this evening. The Director of Equity position was posted last Friday, and really it was just posted because we felt like it was a priority. You know, if we got direction completely on going the other direction from the board, then we would consider removing that posting and move forward accordingly. But it was really a timing thing more than anything else. With the position at that level, visiting with our school principals and trying to get ready for August to make sure that we have someone that is not only started in July but can start putting together some PD. We do our 2-day August meeting with our principals, normally aligned to the staff picnic, so August 12th and 13th. So just knowing that this position is a unique position, not knowing what the candidate pool could look like, and then doing some comparisons with some other school districts that are looking at this position right now and have posted for the position nationally. It requires a position that's not as common, so we wanted to get it posted and up and going, but that is the only position that we have posted prior to this conversation or this preliminary budget approval, and it was A, done for timing, and B, you were completely right. It is our commitment, and for that level position, if unless the board completely felt otherwise, we would try to figure out a way to make that work within the budget as we go forward.
Okay.
Okay, that wraps up the general fund. So that's the most intense one. So we'll move on. Next will be the building fund. Again, no change in the mills we're levying. Same type of formula applied, a 4% increase in value. Included is what will be the sale of bonds for the Explorer Academy. That is the $12 million that you see. Right below that is almost another $1 million, as we anticipate receiving quite a sizable premium on sale for that bond, which is excellent. Fund transfers in really are coming from the special levy fund. And what we're proposing as well is there is some bond proceeds that remain from the days that Davies was built. And our bond documents are always written that if there's anything remaining, it can be used for other needs within the district. And we would just like, currently that is on our books, a separate fund, but part of the building fund. So we're just looking to kind of close that out as well. And then as we get into the expenditures for this fund, the majority of the construction services that I'm anticipating we pay will of course be for the Explorer Academy. We also will be finishing up the early childhood area remodeling at Longfellow. And in addition is the Agassiz plumbing as well that we are proceeding with and will be soliciting for bids shortly. So those are what is really included in the architectural consulting services as well as construction services lines. As we get into the land and equipment areas, you'll see that there's the remaining $6.3 million for the purchase of the RDO building that we will expend next year, as well as fees related to the bond issuance. And then the equipment and technology lines included in here are those items for the Explorer Academy. that have been approved, as part of that project. I should have changed the unobligated set-asides item there as well. So those are just, but now I can't even remember what that is. Isn't that awful? What would that be? I have to think about that. So I'll get back to you on that. I apologize. I thought I renamed it so I would remember. Then principal and interest payments, of course, round out that fund. They have to, that 1 million has to, again, do with, their bond issuance fees. So they're the underwriting fees when we issue that bond. That's what those are. So, so as you see, we will be ticking down the fund balance, or projecting to tick down the fund balance in the building fund, just with the purchases that, and the construction and some of the projects that we're taking on internally with that fund. So if there's any questions on the building fund? Okay, we will move on to the special assessments fund. No change in anything here either. It's 1.25 mils, same percentages applied to property tax increases, or revenue or value increases, I should say. The only assessments that we really have remaining are on EdClap. And then the others, just annually, we're just charged miscellaneous assessments from the city, depending on what projects are taking place within town. And for those, we always just pay them off. So the only one that we still have kind of on the books with the city are EdClap. So any questions on special assessments? Getting nice and simple for that. All right, special levy, even simpler. So this is the fund where no change in mills, same percentages. We never incur expenses in this fund. This fund is used to transfer to the building fund. So the only expenditures you will see coming out of here, of course, then will be that transfer that goes over to the building fund. Any questions? This year I did, and as part of the memo, even though the debt service fund has no fund balance, there are a lot of times when I believe many of you are wondering, well, what debt do we have out there? What's remaining? And so just what are payments going to be? So this is just what this fund only accounts for that, for the payments on our debt. So as part of the initial page of the memo, you'll see our outstanding debt that we have. As we get into nutrition services fund, many of the same principles applied that have been applied to the general fund. We are not raising our meal prices to families for next year. That has been approved by you as a board. And so really the other piece will be the community eligibility provision that we have at Madison and Jefferson right now will be extended to EdClap next year. And so if you, just as a reminder, this is where everyone in the building receives lunch for free and does not have to fill out all of the paperwork and forms. So very excited about that. Cindy is very excited about that as well. Her number one goal is to feed kids. So that's really just some rough numbers right now. This fund, I anticipate a lot of changes yet. Just really unsure of everything we spent this last year with the closure and the additional meal service we did, how that funding is going to play out from the feds as it comes in. So just know that there'll be quite a bit of tweaking probably in that revenue area of what's coming in this fund as we move forward. And based on what circumstances we reopen with, there will be increased expenses here as well, I'm assuming. So just want to throw that out there as we go forward. But as far as salary and benefits, applied the same parameters, took our existing staff, moved them forward to come up with some estimates on that. Same percentages for health insurance. Cindy did, this past year we did do some adjustments as far as the delivery drivers we have do spend the majority of the time in food services. We took a portion of that out of the general fund to be paid by nutrition services. As well, our elementary secretaries, there is a position in where they spend 2 hours of their day helping with the lunch line. And so Cindy is also picking up those in the Nutrition Services Fund. That's really where the majority of the increase in cost is projected here for that, which we feel is relevant and the right way to be doing it. So just kind of wanted to let you know, just we did that change this year as we really took a look at, mostly at her fund balance. Her rules are that she's not supposed to have more than 3 months of operating costs in her fund balance. And because we do truly run a good program and most districts around the country do not run as well as we do, for most of them, that's a hard thing to get to. For us, we seem to get to it and we surpass it. So we have received notice from DPI that we really need to work on getting that fund balance down. And so that was part of some of those conversations on making sure that we have staff costed correctly, which will help along the lines with some of that. So any questions on Cindy's fund?
Looking at the bad debt line, 860, is that, I say it's unchanged. Are we expecting any differences because of the policy changes in the last year to student lunch debt?
Right, so I'll tell you that, you may all remember, may not. I'm trying to remember how we relayed the information. We were fortunate at the break of semester time to have a donor pay off all of our lunch debt. And it looks like in discussions with Cindy that she had enough donated funds as well to pay off for the remainder of the current year. So being in conversations with the lunch aid and the programs that have been generous enough to try to support us with the debt, you know, our typical debt typically would probably be about $35,000. That may change this year also as Ed Clapp comes online with lunch. So we're just kind of leaving it right in that area. Very hopeful though that in the end, you know, our community is great support for us and for our students, and that I would have no qualms saying that probably will get taken care of, but I need to be conservative just in case.
I'd like to make a motion to provide preliminary approval of the general fund, building fund, special assessments fund, special levy fund, debt service fund, and nutrition services fund budgets.
Okay. Motion's on the floor. Any further discussion? We had some great discussion during.
I have a comment, Robin.
Sure, go ahead.
Before we vote. Okay, thank you. So, you know, because again, the proposal, thank you, Jackie, by the way, all of that was very helpful information and delivered in a very, you know, nicely detailed manner for us to understand, so I appreciate that. But because we're still, part of the recommendation is a deficit spend, I won't support it, so therefore my vote will be no, but I just wanted you all to know why.
Thank you for that clarification. I see no hands. Anne Marie.
Benson.
Sorry, no.
Johnson.
Yes.
Knutson. Yes. Brian Nelson.
Yes.
Paulson.
Yes.
Rodenbiker.
Yes.
Ulrich.
Yes.
Ani.
Yes.
President Nelson.
Yes, motion carries. Next item on the agenda is, let's see here. GP7 monitoring. Oh, I printed the wrong, I used my own agenda. Bus contract. That's what happens when I prepare in advance. Sorry, guys. Next item is bus contract renewal, memo number 132.
Jackie or I can do this. You know, with the planning committee and members of the board, we've had conversations around our contract with Valley Bus as it relates to the COVID closures. However, it's also time for a contract renewal with Valley Bus, and Century Code allows us to either it does allow us a process to direct negotiate, as long as we publish notice of doing that. So we are seeking recommendation from the board that would allow us to enter direct negotiations and public notice of that, with Valley Bus.
Christie?
I move to authorize administration to publish notice and enter into direct negotiations with Valley Bus for the renewal of a transportation contract.
Second.
I'm going to give Brandy credit for that second. All right, any discussion on that?
Whenever it's my turn, I have a question.
Oh, sure, go ahead, Jennifer.
Thank you. Okay. So around the authorization to negotiate with Valley Bus, is there any sort of desire? I mean, we've talked now several times about the increased rate at a high rate of this particular line item to the district. And I'm just wondering if this is an opportunity to sort of look at, whether it be small or, areas within the transportation budget where the district could carve out and maybe do something on their own or approach it differently. I know that Valley Bus is really the only large facility in the area, but are there other things that we could do, and should it be part of this sort of negotiated process? Just because I don't see transportation costs as we currently spend as something that is sustainable. Thank you.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Okay, hi Jennifer. So one area that we've relayed is that the special education transportation has continued to significantly increase, and would like you all to know that John McLaughlin at Valley Bus has offered, and we will take him up on it, to put together some kind of group or committee to really review that. Now that has to first come internally from our special education department, but anticipate that we will begin to have much more in-depth discussions, because not only is it an increased cost for us, it is definitely an increased cost for Valley Bus, because they have to be staffing all of that and they have to be providing all of the buses that are needed for that. So it's would be a win-win for both of us to really sit down and have members of the district really brainstorm to see if there's something else that can be done or we can do something differently.
Rubach.
Perfect. Great to know. Thank you, Jackie.
And I'm just going to add to Jackie's point, and Jennifer, I think there's two parts to your question. One, within our transportation itself, are there areas that we have for cost savings, and that's within our contract with Valley Bus. One of the things that was on the preliminary budget slide is looking at as an adjustment, is if and when we have to provide an additional route to students that are not in the Fargo Public Schools boundary. That is a potential conversation that we can have as well. That is a practice that's happened in our district for a long time, and when that costs another route, there is a cost per route for that as well. But then the second piece to your question is just, is there something that we could do in-house versus just that automatic contract or that direct negotiation with Valley Bus, because there aren't other providers in the area. I don't want to speak too much to something that happened before my time, because I wasn't here for it, but I know the district in the past has done an analysis on in-house transportation, and just a startup cost of that would be exponential, just to even get that going to some level. So I know that work has been done in the past, but it was prior to my time.
We've done it two or three times since I've been on the board, if I remember right. Okay, we have a motion on the floor. I see no hands. Anne Marie?
Yes.
Johnson. Knutson.
Yes.
Brian Nelson.
Yes.
Paulson.
Yes.
Rodenbiker.
Yes.
Ulrich.
Yes.
Ani.
Yes.
Benson.
Yes.
President Nelson.
Yes, motion carries. Now we will move on to item 5E, GP7 monitoring and changes. And I will get in order here. Now that I've combined agenda packets, I'm all out of whack here. Okay, this is GP7 monitoring committee structure and monitoring changes. Go ahead, Rebecca. Start the discussion.
Thank you, Robin. I would like to make a motion that the board policy GP7 be approved as provided. You'll note that there is a document that is being handed out to you, so we might have additional conversation if we have a second after this. Thank you.
Second.
Okay.
Well, that went pretty well.
Okay, I think
Let's see.
there are three kind of sections in here, one from governance, one from communications, and one from negotiation. Should we just go through each one by one? Are there any questions from the governance committee about attendance at committee meetings?
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So in here, the added highlighted information as audience members, if or not assigned, are able to attend. I'm just curious how the committee, for the sake of clarity and discussion, would say that members not on a committee that might have important information or might have expertise in some sort of area of an agenda item discussion, how would they be then invited maybe to share or participate to share that information at that particular committee meeting during discussion?
Great question. Not unlike, I suppose, we invite anybody, any resource in, be it a realtor or an architect. We would be, yes, that is part of our job as committee chairs to invite in those experts. So does that help?
So Robin, then just to further clarify, you see the same being true for other board members that would have additional information to share that would be pertinent to the discussion on the agenda?
I would say a great example of that would be your health insurance committee. The planning chair might invite you in to talk specifically about the health insurance. Yes, exactly.
Okay. Would that then also be true at a governance committee, how we forward our, say, homework, right? And sometimes there are policy change suggestions or things that may or may not need clarification around someone's comments. Are those individuals invited to, at the moment, share, if the committee says, well, what did they mean by this? How would that situation be handled?
I would assume how we're handling it right now.
And so they could be called on, is that what you're saying?
I suppose, yes, any member of the audience could be called on, certainly by the chair.
Got it. Perfect. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Great. Okay, the next change would be, I assume, what is coming from Rebecca and is related to this handout.
Sure. Should I go ahead and give an explanation on that?
Absolutely.
Unless someone else had.
Did it stop?
They may have stopped with you, Robin.
Okay. See what happens when you put me in charge?
I can start by explaining. So the memo that is in front of us tonight, Memo 122, was intended for our previous board meeting. And as we know, there were some items that were moved to this meeting from that meeting, and then this memo was one of them. During the time of our last June 9th meeting, the Communications Committee was set to meet. And June 16th, however, there were two of us that attended that meeting. We weren't able to have a quorum at that meeting. My intent at that meeting, because we had received some email communication and communication from the FEA at our June 9th meeting, that had some questions regarding language that was included in this policy change. A couple regarding specifically words transparency. And, words are important, but just using the words don't do it either. We have to have the action. So oftentimes, of course, just because a word's there, that doesn't mean we're being transparent. It doesn't mean we're being transparent. Just because it says we have a communications committee, it doesn't even mean we're communicating appropriately. And so I feel like that has happened in probably the past couple years at least. So my intent with our communications committee meeting was to have that discussion about the feedback that we'd received and what we thought maybe should be included potentially for updates still now, knowing this issue was going to come up at this meeting. So therefore, I guess I took it as a committee chair to recommend a new name for the committee that's currently titled Communications Committee, that the newly recommended name would be Communications Engagement and Advocacy Committee, that the updated purpose of that committee would be to increase the board's transparency of decision-making and communication capacity and receive feedback and support from stakeholders through engagement and advocacy opportunities. And that there would be 5 means as listed at the bottom of that page that's been handed out to you. Number 1, create communications, engagement, and advocacy opportunities with stakeholders such as students, staff, parents, and community members. Where those 4 groups of stakeholders have been listed, those are also stakeholder groups that are mentioned in our monitoring reports, so the intent is to be consistent with those monitoring reports. And to give examples of 4 stakeholder groups, not to say those are the only stakeholder groups, but to give examples of stakeholder groups that we know we want to make sure that we pay attention to. Number 2, work with administration to develop and recommend for the board an annual communications, engagement, and advocacy stakeholder work plan. The intent of this is to be very specific and very thorough and to work extremely hard. The opposite of what we have been doing, honestly, to, with intention and with plan, make sure that we are reaching out to at least the stakeholder groups that are mentioned here. It is not intended for us to not be flexible. It's not intended for us to say, oh, gee, that's not in the strategic plan. That doesn't link up with our strategic plan, but we have an emerging need and we can't talk about it. It's intended to be purposeful, but also have flexibility. Number 3, consider resources such as the district's strategic and other long-range plans, conference and survey reports, requests from other board committees, and administration in the development and maintenance of the annual work plan. So an example of a request from another board committee could include our government relations committee regarding bills that are coming up in the legislature, where that committee and as board members, we work to engage with our legislators. There might be some things coming up this legislative season where we not only need to be reaching out to our legislators and that we aren't the only advocates for something to happen to help benefit the students and the teachers of the district, but we may need to be reaching out to some of our stakeholder groups to help provide assistance, basically beef up our plan. So the idea would be is if a committee has a suggestion where they see this committee could be of help, that we take that on and consider it. Number 4, it talks about the flexibility for needs that might arise outside of our annual work plan. And then number 5 is like what's listed with other committees, work on other projects or issues as assigned by action of the board, membership, staff support, authority, and the terms of the committee would be as was listed in memo 122. And I looked through, we all worked on this in our communications committee, but I just felt like, and thank you for everyone that's been involved in helping to put some of the thoughts together. But in looking through some of the information from the National School Boards Association that John, thank you for providing me with some of that document. Public schools are under fire. And if we don't have a plan, my real personal opinion, is if we don't have a plan to purposefully engage and advocate public schools within our school district, I don't think we're doing our job. So I intend, if we approve this, I intend, or whoever chairs this committee next and is a part of it, that this is going to be some hefty work to do, because I think that we really have to be making up for some lost time, in my opinion. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to share, or any committee members that are able to visit about it. Thank you.
Robin, I would move that we amend the GP7 in front of us to reflect this document that Rebecca has shared with us this evening.
Okay, we currently have a motion on the floor to approve GP7, correct? We don't?
I,
Or just do
yes,
some-
I
Okay.
did, yes.
Rebecca moved to approve GP7 as provided. So John, would you be moving to amend the motion to include Rebecca's changes?
Correct.
First of all, thank you for putting all this work into this. You have fought tooth and nail to help this.
As,
Do I have a second?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so excited. Okay, we got a second. Thank you for your work and your passion around this issue, because you really worked hard on it. And then, thank you for taking this upon yourself to advocate. Any questions for Rebecca?
I do, whenever it's my turn,
Sure,
Robin.
go ahead.
Okay, so Rebecca, I would also like to see the word transparency included in here somewhere, whether it stays within the purpose and we just add the second sentence. So previously, as proposed here, it says increase the board's transparency of decision-making and communication capacity. I see a red line, and then change to create engagement advocacy opportunities. Couldn't we essentially, could we have some discussion around including transparency or leaving that first sentence?
I'm sorry, you know what? You don't have a Rebecca's piece in front of you, because that was included. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Yeah. Jennifer,
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry, you're
That's
right.
okay.
I don't.
No, sorry about that, Jennifer. So I think that the language under the newly proposed purpose addresses your concern, and it says increase the board's transparency of decision-making and communication capacity, and receive feedback and support from stakeholders through engagement and advocacy opportunities.
Perfect. Thank you, Rebecca.
Okay.
Oh,
Any other?
secondly, I'm sorry, may I ask another clarifying, since I don't have that one then in front of me? So the one I'm looking at is the first one, that line item under the means, all six of the first, of the old document. Is there anything in there, and then there I see 4 new ones, that you propose to to leave within the means?
Let's see here.
Because you talk about, I know, I'm just looking through them too, because I guess you do have stakeholders such as students, staff, parents, okay. Opportunities for engagement. So you do, I guess, again, I can't see yours, but is there anything
Jennifer, there really isn't.
that has,
I don't think there's really
hasn't
anything that
changed?
would
Okay.
conflict with your concerns.
Okay.
In fact, I think it's just a little bit more broad and consistent, using the word communications added into number 1, so communications, engagement, and advocacy opportunities. And number 2, just making sure that the language is consistent. Work with administration to develop and recommend for the board an annual communications, engagement, and advocacy work plan. I think the main thing that I added in was a bullet point second to the end where it talks about maintaining flexibility, because I wanted to, my hope was that people didn't think, oh gee, again, if there's a newly emerging need, which oftentimes happens, that someone says, oh gee, we can't have the flexibility to work on that. So
Right.
that was one of them that I added in since our June 9th meeting.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And then, if I may, the last comment I would have under that section would really be under the membership. And, since it is extremely important to engage, whether it's students or parents or community staff, in whatever sort of thing that we might be discussing at this committee level, I wonder what board members would think of sort of reevaluating who actually makes up the membership of this committee. And I know there are some unique ways used within different districts, and perhaps now would be the appropriate time, since we're reviewing this, to have that discussion.
Was that discussion had at all at your committee level?
It was brought up a couple of communications committee meetings ago, and I believe what we did was recommend that discussion go to governance as part of just the overall discussion about the makeup for all of our committees. And I think at governance, we had that discussion. I believe it was a Zoom meeting. And it seemed like we settled on 5 committee members and, the same makeup as we have here.
But that doesn't, I think what she's getting at, doesn't mean that we can't pull in some ad hoc members from the community and resources.
Yeah, I see that completely possible, because I feel what we're going to need to do is, let's say teachers. What teachers? What schools? Elementary, middle, high schools? Students? What grades? There are so many different subgroups. The subgroups ultimately really could be endless. And so I think what we needed to do is to keep it consistent with, again, our policy monitoring language, but then say to ourselves, that doesn't mean we need to be restrictive in who we involve in the conversations, because we won't be reaching out to our stakeholder groups effectively if we're not reaching out and creating kind of broader groups, spidering out.
Got it, thank you.
Again, thank you for all your work on that. And the third change in this GP, sorry, Anne Marie?
We will need, we have to vote on the amendment.
On the amendment to the
Before you'd
motion.
want to go on to the next part, so
Point
that you
well
would
taken.
have Rebecca's into your motion then.
Okay, so that was seconded. Any questions on the amendment to add this language or replace this language?
Can you repeat the amendment or the full motion, please?
The amendment on the floor is to replace what is currently in memo number 122 under the communications section with the information that Rebecca has presented at this meeting.
Got it, thank you.
Okay, sounds like we're ready to vote on the amendment.
Knutson,
Yes.
Brian Nelson,
Yes.
Paulson,
Yes.
Rodenbiker,
Yes.
Ulrich,
Yes.
Ani,
Yes.
Benson,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
President Nelson.
Yes, amendment carries. So we're back to the motion on the floor. This will give Mr. Rodenbiker an opportunity to talk about his committee recommendation and the purpose behind it.
Thank you. Yes, the negotiations committee met and discussed our purpose and means in here in quite some detail. Coming out of that, though, just relatively small changes, but implying, as Rebecca did, a lot of work to be done here. The first change is under our purpose to add the word research and recommend to the full board a list of proposals for contract negotiations with a recognized representative organization. The intent of that is to make sure that board members know that part of bringing the proposals is to have researched those proposals and come with full justification and rationales for those for the board to be able to understand and bring those to the table to negotiate. Along those same lines, and as Rebecca had indicated with the communications change, we're adding a fourth purpose to work on other projects or issues as assigned by action of the board, anticipating that those would largely be to support that research and dig a little deeper into topics for negotiations.
Any questions for John? Okay, we have reviewed all of the proposed changes. Any further discussion? Thank you. That's a big GP. I think we're ready to vote, Anne Marie.
Brian Nelson,
Yes.
Paulson,
Yes.
Rodenbiker,
Yes.
Ulrich,
Yes.
Ani,
Yes.
Benson,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Knutson,
Yes.
President Nelson.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you. How we doing? Doing okay? Keep plugging away? Okay. Keep rocking. GP 14, memo number 118. There was some changes coming out of our governance meeting about the board's budget. And really what this is a product of is the board members tightening their belts. Essentially, we are limiting the amount of national travel that board members would partake in. we have the opportunity, and we were encouraged to attend every year, 4 years, National School Boards Association. This proposal would bring it down to maximum of 2 years. Anne Marie tried to come up with, and I tried to come up with some language to give some flexibility. So we are proposing that travel be in years 1 through 3. The last year of a term usually isn't as effective as the first group. And there was also some discussion around that same topic about, board member expenses. So this is a big chunk. Everybody else is asking to be cut back, so the board should as well. Is there any questions on the proposed language? Christie?
I move to recommend that GP 14 be approved as presented.
Second.
Okay. Discussion. John?
Excuse me. I know when this was first proposed, there was some question of board members attending on their own dime. I believe that this language will permit board members, if they want to self-fund their trip, they will be allowed to do that, but it will not be the district paying for their hotels and conference fees and airfare, et cetera.
Thank you for that clarification. You're spot on. David?
I guess I started talking about this second or third year I was on the board, and I was talking to Anne Marie about what I thought was the incredibly high registration fee at the National School Boards Association, and it gets to be a big amount. And I think giving everybody an opportunity to go twice during their 4-year term is a good thing for us to be doing.
And there would probably be some discussion, so we don't send everybody 1 year, because then we're missing some of the selections. So there might be some strategy behind the scenes there too. Right on. Well said. I see no other hands.
Paulson.
Yes.
Rodenbiker.
Yes.
Ulrich.
Yes.
Ani.
Yes.
Benson.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Knutson.
Yes.
Brian Nelson.
Yes.
President Nelson.
Yes, motion carries. Let's see here. Item 5G, EL5 changes memo number 119. David, was this the one that you had pulled at the last meeting? Okay. Okay. Really, this comes down to, and this came out of go ahead, Jim. Oh, I'm sorry.
At the last meeting, I do believe
Yes.
David is the one who pulled it from the consent agenda at the last meeting, but of course, we didn't get to these at the last meeting.
Can't remember what I had for lunch.
I can't remember.
Remember that I did this 2 weeks ago?
Well, the purpose behind the recommended change was to just really align what our practices are. The superintendent, not unlike our other educating staff, are really not on a performance-based compensation model. And so basically, it's a language cleanup to match our practices. Does that help?
Yes. Yeah, I was wondering if I wanted it pulled just so we could discuss it. I wasn't aware that we were ever using incentives and I just wanted to know if that had been the case. That's why I asked to have it pulled.
Great.
Thank you.
We used to compensate the superintendent and his cabinet based upon the performance completion of the operational plan. And so that was removed when I was not on the board. And so this is the language cleanup. Did you have anything to add to that, Rupak?
Nope, just school administrators as well.
Okay.
Can I ask a clarifying
Sure.
question along those lines? So it's professional development was included in B. I mean, we have salary schedules, which, obviously do, recognize professional development or added education experience, but does that need to be reflected in here in terms of the wording? Since it was in B, now it will not be referenced within, specifically pulled out in this policy.
The change in the way our executive limitations are written, this does not eliminate our ability to continue with those practices. It does not require the superintendent to create an incentive. So we don't have to change any of our current practices where we reward or there's incentives for professional development.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, I'm looking for a motion on the floor. Jim?
I move approval of EL 5 as provided in memo 119.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? You ready, Anne Marie?
You bet. Rodenbiker,
Yes.
Ulrich,
Yes.
Ani,
Yes.
Benson,
Yes.
Johnson? Yes. Knutson? Yes. Brian Nelson?
Yes.
Paulson?
Yes.
President Nelson?
Yes, motion carries. On to item 5H, the item pulled from the consent agenda, EL 9. Christie, do you want to start that conversation?
Sure. President Nelson, I would like to reference GP 120, or 12, in addressing board member violations prior to business item 5H.
Sure, go ahead and let me know what you're thinking here.
Okay. This addressing board member violation for GP 12, they're committed to faithful compliance with provisions of board policies. And is it safe to presume at this time that we have had discussions with FPS ELs and their purpose?
Almost every meeting.
Okay. And both publicly and privately. So at this point, I move to public censure Ms. Benson.
Okay, there's a motion.
Second.
Okay. You want to talk about your rationale there, Christie?
Yes, Ms. Benson has continually reported unsubstantiated and inflammatory comments in our ELs. This has been detrimental to the psyche of staff and as well as administration, and it greatly affects the overall reputation of the district as a whole. And this has been evident in several EL reports that we have reviewed.
Would you be more specific to this EL?
To EL 9 that we just pulled, let me pull it here. The comments made, it's number 13 on EL 9, partial compliance. It states that it's holding back updated information around last year's decline in enrollment was deliberate.
And that is finishing off, okay, so that reads, the superintendent shall not knowingly, recklessly, or negligently endanger the district's public image or credibility, thereby jeopardizing its ability to accomplish its mission. And so you are saying that Jennifer Benson's comments, holding back updated information around last year's decline in enrollment was deliberate. That's your issue?
Correct.
So what happens now? Do I get to respond, or does
Absolutely.
everyone-
Yep, floor's open. Go for it.
Okay, so I mean, that's pretty hefty accusation, first of all. And I would say to you, what I was referencing there happened during the task force, and there was numbers that were purposely not shared during that analysis, and it was brought forward to both Bob and Rupak, and they chose not to disclose it to either the task force or the board. So I've asked time and time again to have that discussion, even back during when that was happening, in a way that would allow the board to really, and the task force, to make their to do their research and analysis based on accurate information. And instead, it was just not talked about. I have proof of that, Chrissy, and so perhaps, you could have asked me that first, but hence why I have to reflect it in the EL, because it happens.
Go ahead, Jim.
And Jennifer, did that happen since we last reviewed this EL?
Last review of this EL was, let's see, this is June.
Anne Marie will have that date here.
I guess when I looked at the dates, I believe the answer is yes, because I wanted to make sure it was within this time period. So I just, off the top of my head, don't remember what that date
Anne-Marie?
was.
This EL was last reviewed in December of 2019. And on that number 13, all board members indicated that administration was in compliance with that EL. When it was reviewed before that, in June of 2019, 8 board members completed that homework, and all board members who completed that homework indicated that administration was in compliance with that policy point.
Yes. And the task force was earlier in February,
Jim?
March. So yes.
Jennifer, I want to make sure I understand what I thought I heard your comment was referencing information relating back to the task force that happened long before December of 2019. So is this comment related to something that's happened since December of 2019?
Yes.
And what was that?
That was data specific to enrollment decline and attendance based on certain boundary proposals, and what that would inadvertently do then to CBE specifically. It was brought up and it was not brought to our attention. Or it was pointed out, I should say.
So this is not about information at the task force? This is about information related to our discussions at the board?
Correct. I'm just saying, like, it's through those conversations and through all of that data and time, it goes back to, it's happened as a result of boundary discussions and lack of the transparency around enrollment numbers and decline. There's also we run into, issues with budget and ADM reimbursements as well because of this, so it's multiple, but it was never brought to us for a discussion. It was never pointed out proactively when it was known about, and important information for the board to have to make their decisions.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Well, I don't agree with the statements that Jennifer's making. It saddens me that we have to have, I do feel like we have to have this conversation. I'm incredibly sad that we have to have this conversation. Censure means that, even if we were to vote to censure, from what I understand, it means that we don't support the comment. We don't agree with the comment that's made. As we know, usually when we have monitoring documents on our agenda for approval, they're on the consent agenda. I'm saying this a little bit so that the people that aren't here and that don't serve on the board know what we do, and then that information goes to governance for review. Usually that takes care of it. In terms of that's the appropriate vehicle to handle questions or suggestions. But my feeling is that this is a very critical statement that requires conversation at the larger board level, not only 5 committee members. And I also feel that it's an opportunity that we need to give to Jennifer to, as we have been discussing a little bit here now, the reasons for making the statement. Because the governance committee is made up of chairs of the committees, and Jennifer isn't serving on a committee as a chair. But I wanted to point out a couple of other items that I see in terms of our policies. And GP2 is very extensive. It indicates that we need to encourage diversity in our viewpoints. It also indicates that the board will allow no officer, individual, or committee of the board to dictate the work that we do, or to be an excuse for not fulfilling the work that we do. Now, I believe that we do need to value the diversity in our viewpoints, and I think we have. This is an example of a diversity in a viewpoint. But I feel like it is really, really getting to the point where if we look at our board member covenants in GP 10, making every reasonable effort that a board member must make every reasonable effort to protect the integrity and promote the positive image of the district and one another. That doesn't mean that we're not critical and that we don't question and that we don't seek to learn greater information for us to make our decision. It doesn't mean that we give an entity a pass. But thank you for bringing this up this evening, Christy, because I too felt like it warranted our discussion.
I guess I would say, if you were looking at GP 12, I did have a pretty extensive phone conversation with this board member probably less than a month ago about how she completes different monitoring reports. And I know we've had extensive, and it's not just this comment, but several others, quite frankly. And so are we focusing on one comment? Are we focusing on, according to GP 12, we don't censure the comment, we censure the board member.
Correct, and when I'm saying this and making this motion, it is several comments that have come in over the last several months. It's not just GP or the one EL 9 that came through this week. It has been others as well. And as Rebecca has stated in board policy GP 10, it's the integrity and it's the coming together as a board. And I think it's important to have diversity, the same as what Rebecca has stated. And one of the things that states in our policies is we can have open, frank discussions, and we don't always have to vote 9-0 on anything. But once that vote comes through, then we come together as a board. And I feel that that's really important, and that doesn't always show. And that has been evident on more than one occasion.
Go ahead, David.
I just want to say that I'm not going to vote in favor of this censorship, and it's not because I necessarily agree with what Jennifer's saying. When I do these EL evaluations, I'm giving you my assessment based on my perceptions, and our perceptions aren't always going to be the same. It's one of the reasons we have a 9-member board. There have been things that others of you have said that I have found very, very controversial, but as I think about them, it's been very, very helpful. So I'm not going to vote to censure one of our members simply because she says something that's inflammatory. She filled it out as I do with, for whatever reason, that was the perception she had of the attendance figures.
Go ahead, John.
I don't think that this is just a controversial statement or inflammatory. I think this is quite the accusation to put into one of these documents. If there is a suspicion that anyone is holding information from this board, that is incredible and deserves investigation. And if it's a false accusation, that should be very much reflected upon the person making that accusation. I was really stunned when I saw this. I would have pulled this from the agenda if it hadn't been pulled previously. This should have been brought to the board president's attention to be dealt with, not put into the document like this before that discussion had occurred, and then follow proper procedures per our policies to perform that investigation or follow up as necessary. I do not think this is a credible accusation. I don't think this is relevant to this EL and its monitoring. And I believe it's wildly out of order for this board and for a board member to act like this and to have done this. For that reason, I think Christie's actions here tonight are appropriate.
Rupak, did you have your hand up?
I did. This is a really awkward situation for administration because we, regardless of the level of controversial decisions that happen at the board level, we are tasked to work for the majority of the board. And that is something that we have to do. And I normally would refrain from this conversation, but since I was named as well as Dr. Gross was named, I do think I owe it to the board to at least share some information. The accusation here is that during a boundary task force meeting, both Dr. Gross and I withheld information about declining enrollment numbers that would impact what that task force recommended. Since that time, the board chose to pass on the task force recommendation. We had a work session where we gave enrollment numbers. Then we had a new proposal for a new building. We went through enrollment numbers. Then that was declined. Then we came back with other boundary recommendations at other boundary meetings where we presented on enrollment numbers again. So first off, I absolutely know that we've never deliberately held information about enrollment numbers, which is public knowledge. And if, for those of you that have seen me speak at Eggs and Issues, State of Our Schools, or any presentation I've given, we have always started our presentation with where our enrollment numbers are at that time. Every presentation since then that we presented to the board, we have given you two charts. One is where the enrollment numbers are at the start of the school year, and then we show you how that decline in enrollment happens between September or August through May. In fact, I think we even talked about it today when we were talking about our budget, that our enrollment is traditionally declining in the spring than it does in the fall. So just in the defense of Dr. Gross and myself, to make an accusation that we deliberately withheld information that's normally public knowledge and is part of every presentation we did, you're questioning our intent. It's hard to question someone's intent when that individual has brought to you both sides of the recommendation, a new building and a boundary change. So clearly, our only horse in this race is to alleviate the capacity issues that we have to support our teachers and our staff, because we've been trying to work at the will of the board. So what motivation would we ever have to withhold enrollment information? And then secondly, if we wanted to deliberately keep that information from the board, why was that not questioned one of the at least 5 to 10 times we have presented enrollment information to this board since that time?
Are you asking me to answer that? Because you did, and there's proof of the charts that were given to you and then never forwarded or sent to the board.
Okay, I don't see any more hands. So in this instance for voting, would Jennifer not vote, I assume?
It is a main motion on the floor. I do not know why one person would not vote.
Jennifer, would you like to abstain from this motion? For this vote?
So I get to vote, or I get to decide to vote on this motion?
Well, there's kind of a conflict of interest.
I mean,
We've never come to this level at the board level, so I don't know how.
I'm not really sure how to answer that question either, I guess. I don't.
I'll leave it up to you. You can say abstain when it comes to your choice or to your turn. Okay. Anne Marie?
Ulrich.
Yes.
Ani.
Yes.
Benson.
No.
Johnson.
Yes.
Knutson.
Unfortunately, yes.
Brian Nelson.
Yes.
Paulson.
No.
Rodenbiker,
Yes.
President Nelson.
Yes, motion carries. How are we doing for breaks? Okay,
President Nelson, will
Yes.
you also be approving EL 9 as our monitoring report?
yes, I guess we need to do that, don't we? I would entertain a motion. Okay,
Second.
okay. Any other discussion on the monitoring report? You ready again? Boy, you got your pen handy tonight, Anne Marie. Oh, I'm sorry.
I would like to amend the motion to have the comments struck or asterisk that there had been previous action in regards to those.
I don't see a second, so that dies for lack of a second. Now we're ready.
Ani,
Yes.
Benson,
I'm sorry, the motion is to strike comments, is that what you said?
No, that died for lack of a second, so now we're just approving the monitoring report like we typically would.
Oh, so we're just accepting the monitoring report, is that what we're voting on?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Knutson,
Yes.
Brian Nelson,
Yes.
Paulson,
Yes.
Rodenbiker,
Yes.
Ulrich,
Yes.
President Nelson.
Yes, that is approved. Now we can go on to board reports, committee liaison and correspondence report. We'll start with David. See how much you got done while we've been closed.
Unfortunately, I think we canceled our negotiations committee, and I missed the communications committee meeting. And I wanted to, I'm not trying to make excuses or whatever, but when people have jobs, it is very, very difficult for me to get to noon meetings. And as much as I hate getting up in the morning, about the only meetings that work with a person who has a 9 to 5 schedule is meeting at 7:30. I did not attend the communications meeting because I could not get out of work.
Thank you. Jennifer, did you have any committee reports since we're at your spot now?
I'm sorry, did you say Jen?
I did.
Health Insurance Committee met. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend. I'm not sure if there's anyone in the room that might have additional comments to share around that meeting or not, but at this time I don't.
Thank you. John?
Thank you, President Nelson. Yeah, I would have reported this last time, but we kind of ran out of time. But back on the 8th of June, I attended at Superintendent Gandhi's invitation, the administrative summit. Robin attended as well. And it was really good. Thank you very much again, Rupak, for that invitation. It was good to be able to speak to all of the administrators in the district and to, more importantly, hear from them. And one of the biggest pieces of our conversation was regarding our liaison visits we do as board members and what those should be like and how to do those effectively. And there was some really great feedback. And as we're coming up on the beginning of a new school year, as we reorganize, as this board reorganizes, I guess I won't be there, in July, it's a good time to start thinking about when you get your school liaison assignments, how you're going to approach that. And the two words that I kept hearing over and over from the administrators was that these need to be intentional and they need to be authentic visits. Do not treat these as checkoffs on your board to-do list. Do not think or say that Anne Marie is going to chasten you if you don't get these done in time. But sit down with the admin teams of your schools early in the school year, even before the school year starts. Get to know them and work closely with your principal to lay out a strategy for the year. you should try and get into your schools as often as possible. And I know, and to the point you just made, David, it's very difficult as board members, but we need to make that time. And this is how we're gonna build that authenticity, how we're gonna make our teachers feel valued, how we're gonna make the board visible in our buildings is by being in our buildings. There's been several concerns about us visiting and teachers feeling like they're being evaluated or monitored. Again, work closely with your principals, and they will help you be strategic about finding those teachers and preparing those teachers for your visit so that they can be a growth-building opportunity for both you and that teacher and those students that are in that classroom. Some of the recommendations for what we should be doing on our visits, and again, this is why we need to be visiting more than once a year, is we really need to be spending time in our special ed classrooms and seeing what's happening there. Think about shadowing a student, if at all possible, through a couple of periods. Meet with your parent-teacher group and their officers and attend those meetings, if at all possible. I know in the last year, it was very difficult for me because a lot of those were on school board nights. But try and develop a relationship with those officers, those parent-teacher officers, to try and avoid that or to create some sort of relationship otherwise. Have lunch, sit in the lunchroom and meet the students and see what's going on and how that occurs. And have the office of your buildings add you to their announcements list as if you were a parent of a student attending there, so you can know what's going on with the activities of that school and attend all of those as well. Overall, they really want to see us in the buildings. They're really looking forward to seeing us out there, as are the teachers, and working with the principal to make that a strategic visit and plan that ahead of time will make that really successful. Finally, the last piece of advice that I thought was really excellent was to provide a follow-up afterwards to the principal and the staff that you met. Everybody should have some business cards, so hand those out as you're going through and meeting people. And a handwritten note with a thanks and a contact card saying, let them get a hold of you anytime is very much appreciated. And so with that, that would be it. Thank you very much.
Those are excellent notes. In fact, I shared very similar notes with President Master that I'll cover in my report, but yours were more thorough than mine, actually. Thank you. Rebecca.
July 9th, the Native American Commission will meet, the first meeting since we took our break due to COVID. I intend to attend virtually the NDSBA board training that's July 22nd. Whoever the new communications committee chair is will set a meeting for that group so that we can get started with that work. And I attended governance on way back on the 28th of May. And of course, we have that Thursday again, and attended the last planning committee meeting. I enjoyed watching all of the virtual graduation ceremonies in Fargo Public Schools from beginning to end. Very, very enjoyable. There was a Zoom meeting today for the Core Neighborhoods Master Plan Steering Committee, and I sent you all the most recent document that the group that is taking us through those exercises provided to us. And hopefully you have the opportunity to take some time to go through that. Our meetings have been recorded, so I'm assuming there's a link somewhere on the city's website or maybe even the Facebook page for the meeting. I'll do some checking, and if I find that, I'll send it to you because, well, I think the meetings are interesting. So one thing I wanted to mention about that is that the consultants are staying in Fargo here now the rest of this week, and they're having meetings each day or evening with the core neighborhood groups, the three groups, and they're really working on trying to they've wrapped up their first plan or first phase, and they're getting into kind of a second phase where they're going to be helping the neighborhood groups. You know, they're all different, right? So kind of come up with a brand for each group and work on toolkit preparation and implementation plans for whatever the neighborhoods are wishing, because some of the wishes and the needs are different. I thought it was interesting that there was the field survey was done of almost 9,000 properties in the core neighborhood area, that between April and May, some NDSU students helped with that field survey, and then also volunteers within the core neighborhoods took time to volunteer, but it was to rate homes based on just kind of like, are they excellent or deteriorating? And there were, I think, about 5 different factors that they rated homes. So it was really interesting to look at the maps. Like, we get those heat maps, right, from the city and use all that information to help us plan. But so these maps look similar to that, but have different kinds of information. And those maps are included in the information that I sent you today. And so I'm curious to continue in on this and see where there is going to be collaboration or, you know, information sharing, I guess, that will be necessary for likely the school district as we move forward with making decisions. And I think that is the end of my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian?
Really just a planning meeting that I attended. I'd like to thank Mr. Rodenbacher, Brandy, and Christy for your 2 years of being on the board with me and teaching me things. And you guys truly do stand up for public education. And I do appreciate all that you've done in moving this school district forward. Dr. Gandhi and President Mastert, I appreciate your guys' and Jackie. There's a lot of communication going on between you all, and I feel you guys are using our resources to the best that we can, or you're trying, and I really do appreciate that and see that work that you're doing. And lastly, I'd like to thank our president this year, Robin Nelson, for all the leadership and representing us that you've done for the Fargo Public Schools this year. It truly is an honor to serve with all of you. I'm not just saying that. I mean that. It's truly an honor to serve with all of you, and I absolutely love it. I really do, so thank you.
Brandy?
Well, I missed the communications committee as well. I kind of overlooked it, my bad, so I'm really sorry about that. I do want to say that I've really enjoyed being on the board. It's been a learning experience, and you know, I tried my best to do whatever came to my mind that I felt in my heart that was correct to do. And Dr. Gandhi, you and your staff are amazing. We could not have picked a better superintendent to lead this district. So I am very proud that I was part of that hiring process, because I think you'll be with us for a long time. So good luck.
Christy?
Planning and then governance as well. And this last Wednesday, we had a foundation board meeting. And with me going off this board, they have asked for me to be a board member of the foundation. So I'm thrilled to be a part of that. And then I was a part of Davy's graduation. Rebecca, if you reviewed it all, you may have seen me running around like a wild woman. I volunteered to be one of 3 photographers at that event, and it was a lot of fun. I took about close to 1,000 pictures, and we had another 600 or so from the other 2 gentlemen. And so really fun to be able to capture it, even though there weren't a lot of people that were able to be there other than 2 people per student. We captured a lot of photos, and we shared those out. They were all available for free download for all parents, so it was fun.
Thank you. Jim?
I was at governance, I was at planning, and we had the summer State School Board Association meeting, which was a remote Zoom meeting. Typically, they make me waste Sunday evening, Monday until 4 o'clock, but because it was a Zoom meeting, it took 2 hours, and I celebrated.
I guess you're done. Okay. Wait, we're reporting for a full month. So May 26th, I was part of the PK-12 Alliance meeting with Superintendent Basler. We conducted some empathy interviews about how parents feel about long-distance learning and how to reopen in the fall. So learned a lot about that. I shared that with RUPOC. Weekly calls every Wednesday night with Superintendent Basler. That was on 5/27, 5/28, Fargo County Public Health Board met, and then there was also a governance committee meeting that day. The next day, 5/29, was a planning committee. June 1st, John and I partook in the admin summit, so we learned that was a great use of our time. On June 3rd, and I'm starting to switch into legislative mode here, there was a Facebook Live event with Superintendent Basler, Representative Shannon Morris-Drones, and Representative Brandy Pyle. So I partook in that as well. On June 4th, I was invited to take part in a special ed call with Senators Lee and Senators Roars. So that was a Zoom meeting as well. The next day was a planning meeting. 6/16 was a very exciting online legislative interim education funding committee. And I had to leave just due to a work emergency, but the on-time funding came in, and that is going to be, I fear that that's going to talk about, well, we increased funding by this much because it's in the bottom line, so we need to remember those dollars when we're at the legislative level. And I'm sure, wait a minute here. And they want all school districts on the funding formula within 7 years. And they were talking about some equity reports for state school. That's my notes because I don't know what that is, so I need to look those up. 6/11, another P12 Alliance meeting. There will be a governance committee. Well, I missed probably the best one. Yesterday, I met with Jennifer Mastrud, and we had a great conversation, a full agenda. I covered the board liaison information pretty much verbatim as to what you did, and then she had some great ideas as well. I am really excited about where these liaison visits are going to go. And if I am not president next year, I want some thought into how we can continue what I feel are very constructive conversations, very honest conversations, and very necessary. So please think about that through the next cycle. We also talked about board transparency and communication with the public and staff, and I put in my notes that I sent to Ms. Mazrud how you were working so hard in this communications committee, and it will survive because you won't let it die. Let's see here. And then we were also talked a little bit more about FEA and board engagement opportunities. After we met with the admin meeting, I had immediately reached out to Ms. Mastrud and said, how can we now get this information from FEA? And she talked about occasional attendance as a guest at their building rep meetings and their executive committee. So just a couple times a year. So we can discuss that more. And then there was some discussion around the new inclusivity and diversity administrative position. And she, like I, had the same question: how deep does this go? Is it only a limited number of groups of staff? And if we want to do this, it's going to be a huge undertaking, but a very important one. Did I miss anything? Okay, thank you. And other than that, we have a governance meeting on Thursday morning at 7:30 on Zoom. Whew. Okay, go ahead.
Robin, can I ask a question? I've had a couple board members ask me about the board picnic, which is scheduled, as of right now, we have the parks reserved for August 12th at the usual time. But I know there's a couple board members who are wondering if we are going to go forward with that. You and I had a discussion not so long ago, kind of, okay, we'll just wait for now. But certainly soon we have to make some decisions about that, because I do need to take the next steps of some planning for that. So I'm wondering when we would maybe make that decision.
I saw Jim writing something down. Jim's usually the host and organizer of that picnic. Do you have any feedback? Jim started the picnic, so I defer to him often.
I don't think we want to be the first entity in town to bring 200 people together in one location, but maybe. A lot's going to depend, I think, on what we get for guidance from the governor's office.
I'm pretty sure that they already did the whole restriction on like bigger groups come July 1st. I could have swore I heard that like this week.
Well, let's look at that, but then to Anne Marie's point, how late do we push it? Because there is some lead up planning to it, so.
Mostly because we have to put the order in for the food.
Oh,
So we have to order the food that we serve, and, you know, that's obviously a vendor order for the chicken, the beef, all of the different things. And so I'm gonna need to know one way or another.
How about if you and I will scour what's coming down from the state in the next couple days, and we might just have to make a decision the decision might already be made for us.
Just wanted to put that out there, because we're gonna unfortunately have to go one way or the other. If we miss it this year, they'll just come back better than ever the following year, but.
That's right. Ribeyes. Oh. We're talking about our deficit budget here. Okay, we have, this section of our meeting is dedicated to recognize our exiting board members. I remember when I sat there about 4 years ago, but I started crying at the beginning of the board meeting, and I cried the entire board meeting. So I'm good for you guys, because I lost it. So we have some people that were fighting over who could read to whom, and so maybe, Jim, did you want to start? Because you have something to read for somebody.
It is my honor and privilege to recognize Christy for the service she's given us since 2016. I want to personally thank you on behalf of the students, the parents, the staff, and the entire community for your service. You won election in 2016 as the very top vote getter in a field of 9 candidates. During your time on the board, you have served as our vice president, as a board negotiator, and you have been an outstanding chair of our planning committee for 3 years in a row. Additionally, you have been the board's appointee to the Fargo Public School Development Foundation during your entire 4 years, and it looks like you'll continue on in that role. During the 2018-19 school year, you served in the Building Capacity and Usage Task Force. You've been diligent in attending professional development through North Dakota and the National School Boards Association conferences and seminars. As an active Fargo resident and parent, you've attended many school functions and athletic competitions. Christy, as a board member, you've always advocated for what is best for students, while also acknowledging the financial impact to taxpayers and our community. You've sought to listen and learn, while also desiring to make the best decisions for the long-term future of this district. Christy, thank you for your time, your talents, and your commitment to Fargo schools. Your dedication will indeed be missed. On behalf of the entire board, and in fact the entire district, I'd like to present you with this plaque of our appreciation.
Yes, appreciate it. Rebecca, did you have something to say?
Now I'm crying because you hugged and, anyway. Yes, I told John that I would be saying a few words about him this evening, and that it doesn't even begin to scratch the surface, but we have only the bit of time that we have. So, John, tonight is the last board meeting of your term. Your voice at the board table has been well thought, measured, and impactful. You have helped to keep us focused, grounded, and moving toward the goals of our strategic plan. During your time on the board, you have provided committee and board leadership, serving this year as our board vice president. You have been a part of our negotiating team for your entire term, leading our team for the past 3 years. From 2016 to 2019, you served as the liaison to the Cass County Career and Technical Education Consortium Board, an appointment for which you always shared your joy and enthusiasm. With your professional expertise, you helped us refine our policies regarding cybersecurity and our need to have our electronic systems protected at the highest level. In December of 2019, you presented the proposal to the board, quote, "Save the world," in other words, amend EL 16 and the long-range facilities plan, stating, quote, "Our planet is facing a climate crisis, and Fargo Public Schools has a responsibility to lead our region's response," unquote, end quote. You challenged the district to achieve net zero emissions by 2030. This is work we will need to continue to explore. Thank you for getting us started. John, you've been an advocate for at-risk and minority students, ensuring that they receive the very best education and attention the district can provide. You enjoy attending district events, whether for your own children or for others at other schools. Thank you so much for your service to Fargo schools. And on behalf of the board, I also have a plaque for you.
Brandy? Brandy, tonight, your four-year term on the Fargo Board of Education draws to a close. We have appreciated your supportive voice of our students and schools at the board table. Your passion has always been what is best for all students, district-wide. Your desire to roll up your sleeves and dig into board and district work is commendable. During your 4 years on the board, you have been a member of the Communications Committee and Governmental Affairs Committee. You served on the Calendar Committee for 2 years and was the liaison to the City PTA Board. You have particularly enjoyed your appointment as a liaison to the Fargo Youth Initiative. Working together directly with our students to have a voice in our community and with elected officials. Brandy, you always remind us why we're here, the students. Your support for our students, staff, and administration has never been questioned and is a needed reminder to all of us during difficult decisions and discussions. Thank you for your service. Thank you for the time you have committed to this board and to the students of Fargo Public Schools. Do not be a stranger to this board. I hope that you continue with your advocating on behalf of Fargo Public Schools. In fact, this might open it up that you could advocate even more, because sometimes being a board member limits you. So to that point, on behalf of the board, I am going to present you with this plaque as well. Now I got flustered and I lost my agenda. I think that's all we have, right? Let's see here. Okay. Our next board meeting is July 14th. As a reminder, that's when we'll do the reorganization, and there is typically only one board meeting in July, but then we also have a work session somewhere in there. So past that, I think we're done. We're adjourned. Have a nice evening, everyone.